Notre Dame fans, welcome back to another edition of the Irish Breakdown Podcast. It's Saturday, Sean, so you know what time it is, man. It's the RTCF show. And boy, do we have a lot to go on today. Sean, you just told me the chat is absolutely on fire about today's topic. But before we dive into expansion and before we dive into Notre Dame's place in the universe, the college football universe moving forward and all those type of things, and trust me, y'all, if we always say that our shows are extensions of our phone calls. If it's anything like the hour and a half call we had about this last night, it's going to be a live show. But first, Sean, recruiting is the lifeblood of a program, right? Mm-hmm. And success in recruiting is being able to establish your home base, your backyard. And one of the areas that you have written about a lot about and talked a lot about over the last really several years, and especially this last year as the talent in the area is ramped up, is Illinois has got to get back to being a place that Notre Dame dominates. You cannot have Ohio State and Michigan coming in and doing to Notre Dame what they've done in recent years, especially with Illinois becoming a state that is starting, Sean, to produce more and more top-level athletes. So we've talked a lot about how important the state of Illinois is, and this past week, Sean, it proved to be big for Notre Dame. Obviously, they got two big-time commitments, and we'll just kind of kick it off first with you, Sean. As an Illinois native, you're Chicago born and raised. You went to the University of Illinois. How important is it, first of all, that Notre Dame start to finally establish some dominance in that state, which for decades was, that was Notre Dame territory?
Well, historically, the pipeline from the Chicagoland area to Notre Dame has been very meaningful. We recently just had a Hall of Famer, NFL Hall of Famer, Bryant Young, from the Chicagoland area. 298 lettermen have come from Chicago and gone through the University of Notre Dame to letter in varsity football. So the importance of this area and mining this area and the talent within the Chicagoland area is absolutely paramount. Mm-hmm. And I believe, we talked about it, we've written about it. I think the recognition of Marcus Freeman and Tommy Rees, who is a product of the Chicagoland area coming out of Lake Forest High School, they understand the talent that's been here, the talent that's been missed out on over the last 3 to 4 recruiting cycles, and they wanted to end that beginning with the 23 and 24 classes, and they've done a great job so far.
And this last week, as we said, especially, it kicked off Wednesday night. This is going to be a crazy week, and we're about halfway through, a little over halfway through. Kicked off Wednesday night, Sean, with Cam Williams, and Cam is going to join the show with us now. So, Cam, thank you so much for joining the show, buddy. We really appreciate you being a part of the Irish Breakdown podcast here, man. Welcome aboard.
Oh, yeah, no problem. Thank you for having me.
So, Cam, obviously your recruitment ended Wednesday night, and I got to tell you, buddy, first of all, to begin, Irish fans, we did a live show during your commitment, and they loved just how short and sweet it wasn't like thanking everyone in the city of Chicago, man. And it wasn't the lead-ins, and you spared us at least 2 commercial breaks. So we really appreciate that you just got to the point, man, to say, hey, let's do this. I'm done. I'm over with. I'm ready to rock and roll.
Oh man, yeah. So with that, when they put me on that commercial break before I announced, that's when I then thanked all, the people who were coming and all that stuff. Okay. So then I was like, I don't want to, because it was weird. I had AirPods in, right? So none of them can hear it. Mm-hmm. So I just would have felt weird thinking again. And then, they're just like, why is he doing it again? So I was just like, to the point. I'm just doing it.
We appreciated it. Let's kind of backtrack a little bit, Cam, because, your recruitment really has heated up really the last 5 months as you've transitioned. The recruiting is getting so much faster nowadays. And you obviously started to kind of emerge as one of the best players in the Midwest. And then more and more people kind of start recognizing you. Michigan's on you. Notre Dame gets on you. When you came into this, it doesn't sound, correct me if I'm wrong, it didn't sound to us like you had this process of, hey, let's get it over with this quickly. Were you expecting to kind of be done by now, or how'd that process go for you?
No, my original timeline when I want to be done is that somewhere between that Thanksgiving weekend and football's about over to about this time next year. So it was no, it was not expected at all.
So our original conversation, I don't know if you remember this. We were chopping it up, and it was just a general conversation. And then we started talking about what schools have been contacting you. And you said, you know what? I really haven't heard a lot. You said your coach was handling a lot of things for you, and you really hadn't heard a lot from Notre Dame. And now we get to that point in March, Irish invasion in June, and your commitment this past Wednesday. What sparked everything? Was there one specific conversation early on that
Man, I don't know. It was really weird. So when I got to that Irish invasion, forgot when that was, but earlier last month, it was like once I stepped on the campus, going through the day and like just leaving, I went with my head coach, and I told him, kind of like on the low, I was like, dude, this feels right to me. He's like, he's a big Notre Dame fan, so he might be a little biased, but so he was like, obviously he was like, it feels right, but he's like, he told me, kind of take the week and really like assess, this feeling you're having. And I was supposed to take a few other visits that following week, to like Ohio State and Michigan and all that places, but I just felt like I didn't have to take those other visits because I found kind of like what I needed, and I felt what I wanted to feel at a place when I was there that day. So that kind of just turned all the other switches off, and that's why Notre Dame was the one. It's just I was there, I felt right, so just went with my gut. So
would you say your ability to feel comfortable in making a decision prior to your junior season comes from how recruiting has kind of evolved, with you having relationships with guys outside of Illinois because of 7-on-7 tournaments, camps, getting to know them? When you went to the Irish invasion, you already had relationships with multiple guys there that had Notre Dame offers. Does that type of environment make it easier for a young man like you to say, you know what, I don't even want to get into the mix of this full recruiting cycle. I just want to go ahead and make a decision because I feel like this is the right place?
Yeah, no, I mean, obviously with CJ and Jack on there, I mean, we were all three of us were there. We kind of felt that little spark in between all of us. We just kind of know like we might all end up here. Just to add on to that, I mean, yeah, I mean, just feeling comfortable, kind of just that if you know type of deal. So, yeah, I'd say that's definitely what it was.
So as you kind of left and your coach told you to take some time, what were the things that you were processing? Like, what was it kind of was going through your head? Like when somebody says, hey, take some time, right? Well, what is for you? I mean, it's different for everybody, but for you, what did that entail? What did that taking some time to make sure? Is it just kind of, do I wake up every day and I still feel it? Is there questions you have to ask yourself? Is it talking to family? What was that process like for you?
So actually, my old youth coach who I'm really close with, he's kind of like that guy, like that mentor type of deal. Like literally I just drove her to his house. I talked to him about it. And, he's got a lot of connections, especially with Notre Dame. So he got me in contact with people who then they got me in contact with people who then some family members who I know who went to Notre Dame got in contact with people. So it was more so just that whole week I was getting information kind of about the school, like the benefits of it. And I mean, I heard nothing bad really. So I was like, yeah, this is it. So it was just really kind of educating myself, I guess, that entire week, like outside of football. So
the one part about the Irish invasion that you were very honest about was how the relationship with Chancey Stuckey was strengthened that day and how he just stayed with you the entire day, coaching you up, giving you tips. Talk about the development of their relationship throughout this entire process.
I mean, obviously, yeah, that day was huge for us because, it's kind of weird. I feel like if I, wasn't there at that invasion, we probably wouldn't even like be sitting here right now. Is the weird part. And obviously, when I told them kind of a week after that I was committing, obviously that grows more. We're talking, we're calling, and obviously he's excited. I'm just excited. And I feel like, especially over time, as I visit there, over the course of the season, I guess, and just this summer, I mean, it'll grow because me and him, I think, kind of just have that click, which is what you want. So I was looking for too, just a guy I can feel that comfortable around, on and off the field. So.
Cam, as we've got to know you and as Sean's talked to you and we've talked to your coach and listened to you talk to other people, the one thing that I've kind of got the impression of is that there's not like one thing that went into this. You're going to look at this holistically. However, you are a wide receiver and catching the football is important and having someone throw you the football is important too.
Yeah.
When you look at just in general, not just Notre Dame, but big picture, but then specifically to Notre Dame, was it a kind of who you're going to play with, who's going to throw you the ball on the current roster, who they commit, and all that kind of thing? What kind of role did that play, if any? And then when you specifically look at a guy that you got a chance to know over the last year and then work out with Iverson Vase and CJ Carr, what kind of role did that play? So sort of big picture, how important was that? And then specifically with CJ, did that at all play a role in either your ultimate decision or the timing of your decision?
Be honest. His commitment really just kind of set in stone. I wanted to go somewhere originally where I have a quarterback maybe committed in my class, who's obviously as talented as he is, and I was lucky enough for that to happen. And it's kind of like the same thing that you see at Texas right now, arch commits and you see all these dudes
went nuts.
Yeah, dudes,
like 10 guys in a week.
Yeah, exactly. So it's kind of like one of those things. And then obviously Jack coming, and obviously the recruiting classes above me and then mine is obviously just going to grow. And I saw that. So I was like, well, obviously playing with a bunch of dudes and who we can have some success with in the future. So
I don't want you to feel any pressure. Okay.
Okay.
You're the first dude from the land of Lincoln in the 24 class. You got some work to do, my friend.
Yeah,
because you took a nice little photo shoot with Justin Stott and Marquise Lightfoot
a
couple of weeks ago. You got some work to do, my friend.
I was bugging Justin after my commitment. I was bugging. Don't worry.
Cam, you've got the decision over with now, right? So, obviously recruiting doesn't stop. Schools aren't going to stop calling you. There's 2 years between now, but you get a chance to maybe take a little bit of focus away from recruiting and say, okay, I've got a season coming up, right? And you've talked about where you're getting. First of all, if you look at your sophomore film to now, your body's clearly evolving. You're maturing, you're growing, you've been putting in the work. As you look at your game, what are the aspects of your game that you say, okay, this is the part of what I'm a good player. Notre Dame and Michigan wanted me, right? But I want to take my game to the next level. What are the things when you go out every day and you put into work that you are saying, this is where I'm trying to take my game. This is what's going to take my game to the next level?
To me, I think it kind of just all starts with like the little things that maybe you don't always think about. So, whether that's getting my footwork better, which I've been doing a lot, just working on my body control type of things. Because as I'm getting bigger and broader, typically, especially at my age, it's, you don't really know how to use your body as well as maybe someone who's at that level already. So kind of just, learning my body more because I've put on 15 pounds since last season. And I maybe grown a little bit. So just kind of those things, working on, like I said, footwork, body control. And, I can run around and catch a ball, but I can't do it as effectively if I can't do those little things right.
Well, we're going to let you go with this last question, Sean. I'm going to put this one on him. Okay. So you've got 3 calls you have to make between now and the time you tee off today, right? So I'm saying if you had 3 calls to make, right? What 2024 kids are you calling to say, hey, we got something going on over here in South Bend. You need to be a part of this. Who are the 3 that you're calling?
Definitely Justin. Probably
answer.
Eddie Turk. I've been bugging him a lot. And, who's the third one? I'd really let's see. That's 2 linemen. Probably Dupree.
Okay.
From Mount Carmel. Get a running back in that mix.
Okay.
Those are 3 guys, and those are also just 3 guys I kind of know the most in this area that recruited like that. Like Marion Stewart too. Those guys are guys. I'd love to hop on the train. So
there you go.
Yep.
Well, Cam, thank you so much for joining us. We appreciate you, and we'll have you back on again sometime. But have fun out there on the links today, buddy. Appreciate you.
Anytime. Thank you.
So, Sean, obviously, Cam Williams, big commitment from Notre Dame for Illinois.
Yeah.
Notre Dame was kind of able to – obviously, Chicago is important. But an area where Notre Dame has really struggled is getting outside the Chicago area, finding some of those Western Illinois, Southwestern Illinois kids that have been going to Missouri and Illinois and SEC and Big 12 territory. There was a kid, obviously, that was on the board from the moment this new staff arrived. I remember the conversation you and I had, like, okay, Sean, we got to get a hold of this kid right here because we got to find out where it is. And even before Coach Easton was hired, but then especially when Coach Easton was hired, there was a young man that just jumped to the top of the list of the must-get category for many reasons. Location being one, as we said, got to lock up Illinois, Sean. But also, it helps when those guys are really, really good.
Yeah.
And our next guest, Charles Jagusah, is that kind of player. So, Charles, thanks so much for joining the show, buddy. Appreciate you.
Yeah, no problem.
So, Sean, go ahead and kick it off, man. I mean, you guys have built up, this is one you've been all over here. So let's go ahead and get this rocking and rolling.
CJ, take us back to that initial meeting and when Coach Fritz came to you and said, man, Notre Dame is really making it clear that they have to be the first school to see you during the open period. Like,
for sure.
What kind of impression did that make on you?
It was kind of funny. So I had like a doctor's appointment in Peoria or something, and it was like the day after my birthday. So I'm like driving back late to school. I pull up and Coach Easton's like pulling up in a big old Tahoe or something, parking in my like the visitor spot right next to me. So we're like walking in together a couple hours late to school. But no, he's been for sure a big part of my recruiting. Probably the biggest part for me, honestly, is just kind of getting to know him and seeing what he has to offer and how he can help me.
So you got to take us right into it. We've been talking about this epic film session, 2.5 hours. You, Harry Heastan, notepads, film, your mother over your left shoulder watching everything. Talk about the vibe, the expectation going into it, and ultimately what you took from it.
I'm a big film person. I mean, I'll just sit here and watch college tape for a couple hours a day probably, but no, that's always fun to just kind of get in and hang out with some coaches and get to talk to people a little bit, because it's like you don't get to do that too often. But Coach Easton from like day one is like, hey, you want to hop on a Zoom call and watch some film? You want to see what you can do? You want me to come in and talk to your coaches, see if I can help? So he's always been super big for me.
And going back to your April visit, one of the things that stuck out to you while your coach was watching the players and the coaches, you took time to watch how the second unit of the offensive line was being coached up. Why was that so important to you?
I mean, it's a pretty deep roster, so it's going to take me some time to kind of get up there and get ready to go. But yeah, it's especially with last year with the whole coaching switch we had at my school, it's been a lot of just kind of like trying to relearn things and do things differently. So I'm just trying to really pick up stuff that I can bring back for my team, but also stuff that I can just kind of figure out on my own.
Charles, let me just jump in here real quick, Sean, because, you talked about a lot about film and you've had a very interesting couple years, obviously with the COVID year kind of cost your year. You had to make a tough decision where you could have just kind of followed everybody else out the door, or you could stay. You decided to stay. So it's been a bit of a, I don't say rocky, but a growing period for you as a young man and as a leader. So obviously that's important for you, but how do you think that decision, because we can talk football and X's and O's, and I love all that stuff. I'm a film junkie like you are, but how did that help build you as a young man and as a leader? Like, what was that process like? How tough was the decision? Obviously you had a rough year, but I mean, how do you feel like you've grown as a leader, as a young man through that decision?
I mean, I think it helped me out a lot. I was like, we had our spring season, and the last game of our spring season, I broke my leg. So I was on crutches for 12 weeks going from spring to, I think I got cleared with 12 practices left, and you got to play 10 to be eligible. So I was like trying to dance my way in. But honestly, that was the thing for me, it was like our Coach Fritz got hired, our head coach got hired first week of July or something. So we had like, I wasn't even cleared yet. So we really had like 10 practices before our team was like really getting into it. So it was rough. And I mean, even the film shows it. Like, it was, for me personally, it was like trying to learn how to run again while blocking someone, and I just couldn't figure it out. But I think it helped a lot just to kind of show me what I need to work on, especially when you like don't get to do technique stuff for a few months and it kind of you lose the feel for it. But also really just what our team can improve on. And I think our team's going to be a lot better this year. So we'll see how it goes.
So, Sean, we now know why he was so punishing. He was angry.
He was angry.
He was angry. So, Charles, now
Yeah.
let's I think to me, obviously, character for an offensive lineman is incredibly important. So that's why I wanted to lead things off with that question. But I'm a football guy, man. So we got to talk some football. When you sat down with Coach Easton and you sit down with Coach Fritz and you kind of guide your path for the next year, obviously recruiting is behind you. Yeah. Now it's about, as you said, what impact do you want to leave on your program? And obviously you getting yourself to be the best player you can be is one of those things. So as you kind of talk about the things you've applied from Coach Easton, things you've learned with Coach Fritz now as you guys kind of go in year two together, what are the parts of your game that you're kind of prioritizing to say, okay, this is where I need to get myself so I can be the best version of myself in 2022 and really lead Alma to some success on the field?
For sure. It's been, I mean, just for me, like all the off-season stuff I've been doing, working with my teammates, trying to get them kind of to communicate better a lot. But also just like me individually, I did a whole lot of pass setting over the winter. There's a place I work out in Iowa City that we get some good guys to come through, some guys that are probably going to play Power 5 ball. And that and kind of just asking Coach Easton questions and him giving me advice, or a lot of the things he says is I'm doing like a quarter of it right or half of it right. And it's just those small things that you kind of got to get switched around and then it'll look night and day. And so I think my film is going to look from last year to this year. I'm hoping it's going to be a complete turnaround, but we'll see.
You talked about that, going to train Iowa City and making a drive. Overall, what do you pull from the ability to be the big fish in the little pond and still choose to stay and build a program with little expectations, but a tradition that's rich in state championships? What was that like? Did you feel like you had to live up to that tradition, or was it really just about the relationship with your friends and the community that ultimately led you to stand still? Because you had opportunities to go to big time programs in different surrounding states.
Yeah. No, a lot of people reached out to me trying to get me to come over, but I don't know. This is the program my original coaches, my freshman, sophomore year, had been at for 20 years. They played with my uncles who all during that like 70s state championship run. And for me, it's just like, it's always been the place that it's like, it's my family. And I didn't even want to go there freshman year, but my mom just kind of made me. And once I was there, I'm like, I don't want to play for anybody else. So,
are you the best wrestler in the family?
No, my cousin wrestled at Iowa a couple years ago. And I mean, he's probably like 140 pounds. So I might be able to take him, but no, he's way better than me. Even I had another cousin that was like a middle school national champ and pretty good in junior high.
Sean, I want to follow up on wrestling real quick. Obviously, that's you hear about a lot of athletes. I play basketball, I run track and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
With linemen, it can differ. For you, it's wrestling. As you look at your wrestling career and the work you put in and all those kind of things, are there things that you say, because I do this is going to either has or will make me a better football player? Like, what are the skills that translate from the wrestling mat onto the football field that you think kind of help you? Like if you're a track guy, right? It's efficiency in your stance and start. It's explosiveness and all that. Like you can look at different traits and say they translate well. What would you say are the things that translate from the mat to the football field for an offensive lineman?
I'd say my speed. I wrestle pretty technically. That's honestly where you can see me show off some of the most athletic things that I do is when I'm wrestling. So speed for sure. Definitely hand work, but it's a little bit different because it varies. Like wrestling and footballs, the feeling's a little bit different. Foot quickness for sure, but also probably just knowing like the mental side of wrestling is a thing that not a lot of people think about, and kind of understanding angles and how someone's going to move when you do certain things and how balance is. So I think that's probably the biggest thing for me. It's just the movement side and the understanding how what you do is going to affect your opponent.
Does having patience in wrestling help with blocking guys on the offensive line?
For sure.
Patience translates, yeah.
Because sometimes I get out on the mat and I try to blitz people and it doesn't go as well as I'd hope. But especially last year, I feel like because I missed that wrestling season and that whole off season, I was just kind of trying to muscle kids really hard because I wasn't even worried about technique. I was just worried about making sure my other linemen weren't going the wrong way.
Mm-hmm.
So, I mean, it helps to just kind of calm you down, and the cardio that you do in wrestling and all the conditioning stuff, it keeps you tough. So it's not like when you're out on the field, you're out there dying, even playing both ways. So that's big for me.
Well, you can be honest. We know you're an offensive tackle.
Yeah.
But be honest, you love playing defense more. It gives you a chance to really bring out the mean streak in you, right? Tell the truth.
I mean, I wanted to be a D lineman. I don't know. Freshman, sophomore year, I was like, Coach, I'm a DN. I think I was like 6'4", 270, sophomore year, 280. And then I just kept growing and everybody's like, nah, you're playing tackle.
So, is it safe for us to assume that you might be, as you're walking off the practice field at Notre Dame one of these days, kind of like nudge up to Coach at Washington, like, "Hey, you're getting goal line."
I know. I've been trying to get my coach to do anything for me. I mean, like, put me a tight end, put me a running back. I can do anything, but it's not going to happen. So,
Charles, I want to talk a little about recruiting. Obviously, one of the things that we learned during your recruitment is like Coach Sharon Moore and Coach Pittman and the O-line coach at Arkansas, the coaches of Missouri, they all did a great job recruiting you, right? And you've got to pick somebody, right? So Notre Dame obviously was the choice. Those teams did a great job. What I want to get to with you is, as you just with the evolution of just the Notre Dame aspect of it, was there a time when you felt one of two things where, you know what, like, I'm still going to do my visits or whatever, but, I really feel like Notre Dame is the choice? Or was it after the visits where you're just like, you kind of knew, like, when was the moment where you really felt like this was going to be the move, or this was the move? What was that experience like for you? When was that moment for you?
Honestly, at the start, Notre Dame wasn't even really on my radar until the coaching switch. Because I think a couple days after Coach Freeman took over, I got like 3 or 4 phone calls from him, talking to him a little bit. But yeah, over the winter, kind of tried to figure things out, tried to stay in touch with coaches a little bit more, and just kind of track the trajectory of how things are going. But I'd say Coach Houston coming in and just getting to talk to him was huge. And then that April visit that I took was really big, just to kind of confirm how I felt about Notre Dame and Michigan when I was over there.
Mm-hmm. How do you kind of go through the process of you feel like I feel like this is the move, but I also want to give coaches that you clearly had great respect for Coach Moore and the coaches at Arkansas and Missouri. How do you try to go through that process? How do you balance, like, I think I know this is the move, but I also want to be open-minded enough to learn about these other schools? Like, how did you kind of handle that part of the process?
Well, it was a really tough decision for me. I mean, I didn't really feel like I had anything figured out. Like, Michigan was still super high for me. But I really just kind of took a step back and thought about it and thought about the people and which program is going to give me the stability throughout my career, and I was Notre Dame. So that's really why I made the choice.
Did you get a chance during the process to get to know any of the guys that are in the class? Obviously Elijah Page committed at the beginning of the month. It's funny. You look at the sort of the kickoff and the end of the month of June. It kind of started off with an offensive lineman. It ended with an offensive lineman. Did you get a chance to get to know any of those guys, either Elijah Page or Sullivan Absher or Sam Pendleton? Have you got a chance to get to know any of those guys during this process, or is that kind of just starting to build?
Excuse me. It's really just starting now. Kind of got added to some group chats and started talking to guys, but I knew Pendleton. We were there the same weekend in April, so we were on the same tour and everything, and got to talk to him and his family a little bit. But no, I haven't really met any of the guys yet. So
Cam Williams, he committed the day before you did.
Yeah,
and he was on before you today. and he's headed to play some golf. We know you play golf. We know that all of the guys in the O-line recruiting class in 23 play golf. Have you guys started talking trash about your golf games yet?
Not yet.
At least Charles hasn't.
I was out a couple of days. Well, because they're probably all better than me. I just started like a couple months ago, but yeah, we talked about it a little bit in one of the groups. No, I was out I think yesterday at the John Deere Classic watching a little golf.
Nice.
Well, here's the thing, Charles. If you start feeling bad about your golf game, just play me, and you'll feel a lot better about yourself. I can guarantee that. There's no question.
I can shoot under like 100 on a good day.
Me too, and putt, but that's a different conversation. Sean, you got anything else for Charles?
No. Okay. Irish fans, you're getting a fantastic young man. I tell Brian all the time. Every time I would talk to him, I would try to talk strictly football. And all of a sudden, the conversation would go to something else towards the end. And you end up realizing that I think I said this the other day, and CJ, you probably can attest to this. I said I was talking to a young man, and I felt like he was making a regular college decision rather than a football decision.
Mm-hmm.
It was like he enjoyed all the schools, and like every school has something different, but it was one school that just stood out for all the right reasons. And it didn't even feel like a football recruitment. It felt like a teenager making a college decision. And ultimately, thankfully for the football fans of Notre Dame, it ended up being the University of Notre Dame.
For sure. I mean, football is big for me, but it's not. It's important, but I have other things that I want to do and other things that I'm interested in. So it's kind of trying to balance all of that and balance with my family and everything. But yeah, it was a tough decision for sure, but I'm happy with where I'm at.
I know your mom said you had dreams of being a NFL GM one day.
Yeah, something like that. Maybe even branch out a little bit, go to a different sport, a little baseball, a little soccer or something. I don't know.
Nice. Well, congratulations once again.
For sure. Thank you.
Charles, thanks so much for joining us, buddy. We'll get you back on here again soon. So enjoy the rest of your beautiful weekend. It's really nice. Charles, and a lot of people in the chat, a lot of Notre Dame fans excited to have you on board, man. And they're all saying good luck, congratulations, happy to have you on board. So we'll talk to you again soon.
For sure. Thank you.
So Sean, obviously, it's funny you brought up him always wanting to talk other things in football, and that was always my not frustration, but like I would want to call you and talk to you about how his recruitment was going, and all you'd want to talk about was just the interesting things in him and his mom, and it said really interesting family, and I mean that in a complimentary way. Like it was not a typical recruitment. I mean, you don't often hear about moms being like, I want to get in a film room. You know what I mean? And I wanted to see what Coach Heastand's plan was for him as a football player. Like, it was a different animal, man. And it was a really fun recruitment to follow. There's no doubt about it.
Yeah, I was talking the other day and I was like, I felt like, I don't know if it was you I was talking to, but every school literally gave him something different. Mm-hmm. University of Missouri was kind of that school that had been there all the time. University of Arkansas with Sam Pittman and what he's doing and reviving that program. It was kind of like the chance to play for a school that was reviving everything similar to where he's at in his high school career right now in Alleman. And then you go to Michigan and Notre Dame. Mm-hmm. And they have a lot of similarities, but then there are a few things that differ. The community in Notre Dame is very similar to the community that he lives in now. He was very comfortable with that. You already know, he said it. Harry Heastand made the world of difference. And the other difference was that guy that just happened to get hired.
Yeah.
Marcus Freeman. How many times have we talked to recruits that have told us their view of Notre Dame totally changed the moment Marcus Freeman became the head coach? So it's a collaborative effort. It was a great recruitment. And for Michigan, for him, was kind of like the school that will allow him to get outside of his comfort zone.
Right.
It was the school,
the big public school, the party school.
Yeah.
Right.
So, like I said, I felt like a kid was making a regular college decision rather than a football recruitment.
It was striking because you talk about the impact Marcus Freeman has, and a lot of times I think this conversation turns somewhat, sometimes it's appropriate, but sometimes incorrectly, into the sort of the force of personality, the cult of personality with Marcus Freeman, as if like these kids are just coming because he's putting like a voodoo spell on people, right? Like, yes, he's charming and he's intelligent and all that, but there was something that Charles said at the beginning too that also is factoring in. They're not getting these kids just because Marcus is a really likable guy or he's, it's also because there's an expectation that's being promoted throughout the program of we're going to work on the recruiting trail. And he talked about it with Coach Heastan and how often he would call and all the different conversations they had. But then he said like I wasn't even, Notre Dame was on my radar until the coaching change, which is inexcusable. But I don't want to go there. He said he was like he got calls from like 3 or 4. I think he said like 3 or 4 coaches like right away. That's the change.
I want to commend you right there because you almost got riled up.
I did.
Almost did, but you controlled it.
It's all the therapy I've been going to every day. But I mean, but it's that, right? It's I'm going to hire people that are good at this, and I'm going to demand that they put in the work. And that's the reason that we're seeing what we're seeing is kids that like. Well, think about some of the biggest names in this class, right? In the 23 class, you've got Braylon James. You've got Charles Jagusah. You've got Sullivan Absher. You've got Elijah Page. You've got trying to defensively. You've got Boubacar Traore. You've got in the secondary, Micah Bell. These guys were not even on Notre Dame's radar when Marcus Freeman was hired, right? And like the first commitment he got was Peyton Bowen, but Peyton Bowen had been on their radar since the previous summer. Like they were on him. They got a Dontra. I mean, there were some guys that they were on, but some of the best kids in this class, like top 100 receiver from Texas, top 100 offensive lineman from Illinois, right? Like 400-meter dash, one of the 5 best. I saw on a tweet yesterday from a track website that Micah Bell had one of the 5 best 200-meter times in the nation for last year. Not on Notre Dame's radar for a long time, right? Like, and it just kind of speaks to that's the change. It's not just Marcus Freeman's personality that is the result of it. Yes, that's a factor in it, right? But it's the work. And I think sometimes when we focus on how young he is and engaging he is and all these other kind of things, we lose sight of the fact that this staff is putting in work to get this done. And it's top to bottom. Was it you that asked me the other day? Somebody asked me the other day, they said, who would you say is the weak link when it comes to recruiting for Notre Dame right now?
I didn't ask, but I'm interested in hearing your answer.
The answer was there isn't one. I mean, who would you say that would be? There's one potential answer. I'm not going to give it right now. I may give it to you off the air. But the reality is there's not one, because there's one coach whose position I question how that has been recruited. But that changed recently with a big-time commitment, but he's had an impact on a lot of other players. And so when I look at him like, I mean, I've heard people say, well, it's Mike Mickens. If Mike Mickens is your weak link, you're recruiting at an elite level. I mean, like, that ain't it. And you could say, okay, well, Chris O'Leary didn't get any safeties his first year. Okay, cool. I get that. He's got 2 dudes now in this class, right? So
a chance for a third.
Right. And so there isn't one at this point in time, because that's the expectation that Marcus Freeman had when he got hired. I mean, I've been told this by multiple people. Every coach he had interviewed, like, you come here, you got to recruit. Just so you know, something you got to put the work in, and it's something he demands. He talked about how they meet every day. I mean, that wasn't the case in the past. I'm not trying to drag up old stuff, but you can't hold people accountable if you're not around them every day. And that level of accountability, I think, is a big part of this too. And this is what happens when you make the right hires and you demand excellence in how you work. This is the kind of stuff that happens. But we saw that in the conversation with Charles, is that, this is a kid that 7 months ago was not on Notre Dame, was not on his radar. And now he's one of the biggest commits in the class. And you can also see the impact of just Harry Heastan being Harry Heastan had on that young man as well.
We've been on the other side of this as well, Brian.
Mm-hmm.
We've seen recruitments where Notre Dame was in a great place, and in a matter of days, weeks, all of a sudden, we're sitting here like, what the heck happened? Right? So this is just recruiting. And if you have a great staff, you're going to do it the other way, positively for your program more than you're going to, of course, lose guys.
And that's happened with this class. Like, that's happened since the staff has taken over a couple times.
Yeah.
And it's going to happen, and there's going to be mistakes, but it's such a it's such a like when it happens now, it's like it's a shock. It's like, wait a minute, hold on a second, what? Like when Notre Dame loses a kid, you're like, hold on a second, that's not supposed to happen.
Right.
And that's changed. Like talk about a culture change. You and I did a show on the culture change at Notre Dame. I mean, that's one of the biggest ones. Is like you're starting to see more and more fans be like, hold on a second, they lost a kid. That doesn't make sense. Like how'd that happen?
Yeah.
And it's been fun to kind of follow that, Sean. There's no question. But to the topic at hand, we've talked a lot about, Ryan and I have talked a lot about how the North in 23 and 24 seems to be abnormally filled with talented players, but also talented skill players.
Yeah.
And, you look at the 2024 class, there's going to be some kids from the Chicago area they're going to have to turn down that are really good football players.
Absolutely.
Which just speaks volumes. And so, again, they've got to be able to say, this is who we want, this is who we're going to get. And to be able to get, because you look at Michigan, we've talked a lot about over the years how when a pipeline is established to a school, it can make it harder for others. Well, Ohio State and Michigan have kicked Notre Dame's butt a little bit in Chicago in the northern Illinois area the last few years. They had to have some success to start to establish that. And, of course, this is with Charles Jagusah, who's not a Chicago kid but an Illinois kid, but then Cam Williams, it helps with that. And it's so important. Here's another reason why Chicago is important. We see it with Drake Bowen. We saw it with Blake Fisher a couple years ago, where when you've got a kid that lives close by who is a big-time recruit and commits early, he's at every big event that you have. And now you've got several. You've got Cam Williams. Charles is too far away to be considered that guy, in my opinion.
Yeah.
He can't just hop in a car and come every weekend. It's a little different animal where he lives. Correct? If I'm correct, if I remember correctly, where he lives. But with Cam Williams, with CJ Carr, with Brandon Davis Swain, these are kids that you look at and say, this is big to have those highly ranked top 100 caliber guys that are close by to where every time there's a big time commit on campus, at least one or two of them are going to be on campus. And that is also another reason why, especially the Chicago area, is important, because if you can get athletes out of Chicago that are legitimate big time athletes, and I believe Cam Williams is, and then they're also considered highly ranked as well, and they're close by, it only adds to the value of getting those recruits.
And that's just a continuation of the 23 class. Going back to Cam Williams, we talked to him, we wrote about it. The first person he called immediately when he left the Irish invasion was Drake Bowen.
Mm-hmm.
And who was the face of constantly making it up to South Bend?
Right.
At every moment he has a chance, it's Drake Bowen.
Right.
And that has
he would get out of his baseball uniform and immediately head to Notre Dame this spring and summer. Yeah.
And so now that has been transferred. I think these guys have watched Drake Bowen from afar, fallen in love with the program, fallen in love with the coaching staff, and now they want to be part of the movement that's been established by the class of 2023.
Mm-hmm.
And they're taking the reins for the class of 2024. And like you said, all these guys are basically maybe over an hour away, hour and a half at the most from campus. So at any moment's notice, if they get a call from the coaching staff saying we need you, and they can do it, they're on the way. And that's a great thing to have. Being able to recruit Indiana, if you have guys in Indiana, Michigan, and Illinois, that's one of the benefits of having that.
I want to bring up a super chat here, Sean, before we transition to our next topic. And we'll do like a Q&A, like a bigger picture Q&A at the end. But there was one question, and it was a super chat from Mike Farino, so I did want to bring it up now. So I appreciate that, Mike. But he says, how much does this year affect Freeman since he has no experience? Obviously, they don't need to go 12-0 or 11-1, but if they go 10-2 or 9-3, how much does that affect things for 2024? And then, of course, people chiming in that 9-3 isn't that unlikely. I think it is. I don't understand why people automatically think that Notre Dame is somehow inferior to a team that went 4-8 last year, because they got some transfers from,
Yeah.
But that's a different story for a different show. But so when you look at this, how the success on the field matters, right? I mean, they've got to win. He's got to now prove that he can coach.
Yeah.
But I think it's more going to be an impact on beyond 2024 than I don't think it'll have much of an impact on 23 in regards to they won't lose guys if they go 9-3. But I don't. It'll make it harder to like flip a guy, later. and it could have an impact on some big guys in 24. But I still don't think that it is because you're going to be able to kind of spin it a certain way. Especially if you go 10-2, it's fine. I mean, they'll be fine. I don't love 10-2, but from just a recruiting standpoint, they'll be fine. 9-3 or worse to me starts getting to that. You haven't been like that in a while. And I know the schedule's amped up, but you haven't been like that in a while.
Yeah.
So I think 10-2 is minimum what they need to do, in my opinion, to really keep this momentum going. Anything worse than that, you could stagnate a little bit with some kids, in my opinion. What are your thoughts?
The culture change that we talked about a couple of weeks ago is really what's going to be at the forefront when everything goes on this season. Physically, they're going to have the advantage pretty much every game except for maybe one. Because I think physically, when you look at both sides of the ball against Ohio State, I think Notre Dame has the better players. That's just my opinion. Clemson might be the only time where I say, okay, in the trenches, this is going to be a heavyweight battle. But there are probably about 2 to 3 instances where Notre Dame will go into a matchup not having the better quarterback. That could be possible. And with that being said, quarterbacks can decide games in college football. Anything can happen. But I'm with you. Anything less than 10-2 is outside of the realm of
disappointing.
My expectations. Yeah, absolutely. So
it's the same argument we had last year, Sean. Like all the arguments I'm seeing people make in the chat. Well, this and that, and this team could be tough. It's the same thing last year. It's like what it comes down to is I don't think people understand that Notre Dame in at least 10 games this year, and I think it's debatable for an 11th.
Yeah,
is going to be the most talented team on the field. And it's usually not close. And, yes, USC could match Notre Dame in talent for talent in a 7-on-7 game, but they're not going to have the more talented roster that day.
Right.
So you're going to have to buy – it's the same thing you're going to have to buy into last year. You're going to have to tell me that they're going to get out-athleted 3 times for them to be worse than, 11-1.
Yeah.
And it's the same argument last year. People tell me – there was people literally – when the over-under for 7.5 came out last year, which was absurd, and we laughed and mocked it. There were people in the chat, Notre Dame fans were like, well, but insert North Carolina and Wisconsin and USC and all these other schools. Because remember, USC was supposed to be a top 20 team again last year as well.
Yeah.
And it's just the same thing as like it comes down to like sort of that expectation of, well, yeah, of course we're going to do this, right? Of course we're going to lose that game. Of course we're going to drop this game. Even with Brian Kelly, a guy that you and I didn't have a ton of respect for, Notre Dame beat all the teams they were supposed to the last 5 years. The only games they lost, with the exception of maybe Michigan in 2019, and Michigan. I'm not maybe Michigan. They had a much better roster than Michigan in 2019.
Yeah,
that was a little bit of a weird scenario, and you get down to it, and it's funny. Somebody says, "I'm a realist." Same stuff I heard last year. Like, you think we're saying this as fans? Like, we study the game, we break down the game. It's the same thing when everybody told me. Remember last year when I made fun of the fact that they were considered an underdog to Wisconsin? You know what I mean? Like, Wisconsin's not going to be that good. Notre Dame played like garbage in that game and still won by
going away.
You know what I mean? Right. And they played like crap in that game.
Yeah.
Notre Dame was even worse than I thought they were going to be last year, and they still beat all those teams, right? And that's the thing is when you look at it, it's like if you're positive about Notre Dame, people will say, well, you're just a fan, or you're just no, this is what they have been for years, right? And unless you're someone who believes that no, the only reason they were good is because of Brian Kelly and his staff, I don't see how people are jumping on the 9-3, 8-4 bandwagon. It's just other than just preparing themselves for disappointment again, like they have for so many years. That's what gets down to it. So it's a little
and we've said this, and I'll just go ahead and throw it out there one more time. To say 9-3 is to be disrespectful of the culture that's being created by these players
and the talent of the players.
Like, these players are the ones leading the charge, saying national championship.
Right.
And we're not dropping the banner just because it's a new coach.
Right.
The coaching staff is taking their lead. That's their expectation that they've built up over the last 2 years. That is the culture of this program.
Right.
And they expect nothing less.
Right.
So when you have a locker room that thinks that way and
Right.
understands and has players in it that have already been to 2 college football playoffs, they know how to win.
Right.
They know how to win close games.
Mm-hmm.
They've been in those close games. They're not about to walk into the horseshoe and be scared of the moment.
Right.
Every week is a big game for Notre Dame in some way, fashion,
Right.
form or fashion, either for the other team or for both teams on the field.
Right.
It's a big game. And Notre Dame more than likely has to go undefeated to make it to the college football playoffs. So every week is a big game.
We'll have to have that show here this summer too.
Yeah.
Because that's one you and I disagree on, but that I don't want to derail that. But to your point, Sean, they can't go worse than 11-1.
No.
I mean, which again leads to your point of these are all big games, and we always heard, oh, this is the other team's Super Bowl and all. I mean, so we'll see what kind of coach he is.
Would you agree going into the season that they're in much better shape as a team?
Yeah.
Than we thought they would be, or than we thought they were last year going into the season.
Yeah.
So it is.
Yeah. And it's the same thing as last year. It's like the schedule's not as tough as people think it's going to be.
Yeah.
That was and it's not that I think Notre Dame's going to go beat Georgia and Alabama and blow these teams out when they get to the playoff. No, I'm just telling you the teams that everybody think are these great teams are not as good as you think that they are.
Yeah.
Outside of Ohio State, there's not a team on the schedule that I view as a playoff team this year. Clemson may get there if Notre Dame lays an egg in that game because the schedule's weak, but this isn't close to the Clemson team they had 2 years ago, much less 2018.
Do they have a quarterback? Everybody's wondering about our quarterback.
Right.
Do they have a quarterback?
Yeah, Kate Klubnik's really good. So, Mike Farino with the follow-up super chat. We appreciate that, Mike. I'm an Ohio State fan, and my expectation for you is either 11-1 or 10-2. I mean, I think that, to me, 10-2 for me is the floor. Anything worse than that is – floor for me is once you get past the floor, it's a disappointment. Mm-hmm. Anything past 10-2 is a disappointment. So, to me, 10-2 is the floor for this football team. So, we'll kind of see how that goes. Sean, let's transition into we're going to do something a little bit different this week. Our 2 and 3 topics are going to kind of combine together, and because we do recruiting first, and then we kind of did a mini team thing there. So we kind of did team, but we're going to talk about team and college football together in regards to this idea of college football expansion. This has been a crazy week, and then Notre Dame's kind of place in the college football world. So let's get into it, Sean, because we've had a lot to say privately about this. Let's dive into it.
The elephant in the room, of course, this week. We were doing a show about a recruit, and the chat was full of news about UCLA and USC officially becoming a part of the Big Ten in the year 2024. It was something that was stealth. It was something that a lot of people didn't see coming, including those conferences that had aligned themselves with the Big Ten after the SEC, NAB, Texas, and Oklahoma, standing pat saying that they weren't going to do anything to harm the integrity of college football. And still, here comes the Big Ten, nabbing USC and UCLA. Both of us, in speaking, think it's beneficial and a win-win for the Big Ten. Like a big, huge win for the Big Ten, especially in basketball and football.
Yeah. Can we explain what we mean by that? When we're talking very narrowly, simply looking at the immediate impact for the Big Ten, take away all the other stuff we're going to talk about. But yes, and that very narrow thing, yes, it is a big win for the Big Ten in that.
Big win because
it's got the LA market.
Yes. And I want to bring up something in a conversation that I had with Brady Quinn. He brought this up and he said, after pursuing Notre Dame for years, Big Ten looked at the national success of the brand of Notre Dame and started to build the schedules of their conference after the Notre Dame model. And that has always been their thought process of where they wanted to go. They wanted the conference to go from coast to coast instead of being regional. So everyone thought it was strange when they originally moved the Big Ten basketball conference up to Madison Square Garden after they brought Rutgers in to get to the New York area. It was all the big plan to make the conference coast to coast. And with the acquisition of USC and UCLA, They've finally been able to do that. They really are going to be able, and this is what it does. There are so many Big Ten alumni in California that are going to give even more now because they're going to be able to watch their teams and be excited about their teams because of this move. And it's a brilliant financial move. Football-wise, I think it actually forces USC, and you can go right and jump right on the back of this. It forces USC to do something that they probably were unwilling to do because they were so used to doing it one way and dominating the Pac-12. Now, in order to compete and beat different types of teams that exist within the Big Ten, they're going to be forced to recruit differently. They're going to be forced to play differently, because honestly, the Pac-12 for the most part was kind of like fast break basketball with minimal defense.
Sure. Especially once Stanford stopped being good.
Absolutely.
They were always the exception. Right.
But now think about them coming into a conference that probably sports 2 to 3 Stanfords. Effectively.
Yeah. Michigan State, Wisconsin. Yeah.
Iowa.
Yeah.
So now instead of saying, okay, we have to gear up for Stanford once a year, now you have to face that 2 to 3 times a year and then go face a team with more speed like Ohio State and then face another team that's talented but just hasn't been able to get over the hump in Penn State. So it's going to be a challenge, but it's going to force them to step out of their comfort zone, which honestly I think is actually good for their program, and I think it's the same way for UCLA.
I actually think UCLA is going to make a much smoother on-field football transition than USC because if you go watch them play last year, they were a physical running football team.
Zach Charbonnet running back.
Offensively.
Yeah.
They both have very little talent on defense, but UCLA at least was an effort team. So I think they'll actually make a little bit of a smoother transition. We talked about this last night, Sean. I think USC is going to – I'm very curious what they're going to do because a lot of people talk about, Lincoln Riley ran the ball a lot at Oklahoma.
He did.
But they ran it against defenses that were soft. I mean, inherently soft.
Yeah.
And they never quite ran the ball that well in the bigger games, which is similar to an issue that Notre Dame has had, right? I mean, Notre Dame hasn't ran the ball well in big games either. I think it's for different reasons. But the reality is when you aren't running the ball well in big games, it's usually because there's an inherent flaw somewhere that causes you to not be that team, right? And, so you go look at, they were under 100 yards against LSU in the playoff game, didn't run the ball overly well against Baylor in the title game and won by a touchdown against an okay Baylor team.
Yeah.
Didn't run the ball all that well against Alabama. And a lot of the running that they did have were scrambles from what's his name, Kyler Murray. And then you go back to the first year, they ran the ball really well in the postseason. They ran for the ball over 200 yards in the blowout win in the Big 12 title game over TCU. And then they ran for over 200 yards in the loss to Georgia. I went backwards for a reason. Because for me, the further they've gotten away from Bob Stoops, the less effective they were running the football.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's what I'm curious to learn about what Lincoln Riley wants to do with this football team is how quickly or is he going to be able to get that run game going? Because the reality is teams are already prepared or are already having to deal with a team like Ohio State. They're going to be more prepared for that than I think USC might be prepared for what's going to go on in the trenches in this league.
You just said something right there. Lincoln Riley leaving might have actually been the best thing for Oklahoma.
Because we've talked about that before.
Brent Venables might be the better coach to lead them into the SEC.
Right. Because their offense isn't going to be as good, but they're going to be much better on defense.
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. I could see that. I could see that. Yeah. When I look at it from just a Big Ten standpoint, I get what the Big Ten's trying to do. I don't like it, but it's about here's the thing people have to understand. I had some knucklehead on Twitter was like, you don't understand where the college football is going. Like, no, I understand perfectly. I'm not speaking as someone who's predicting what's going to happen. I'm speaking as someone who knows what's going to happen, and I hate it.
Yeah.
There's a difference. And just because something is happening doesn't mean I got to sit and take it and like it, right? I'm going to speak my mind because I can and we can. That's what these shows are for, right? To give our opinions. So when you look at it from the standpoint of when Sean and I say this is a big move for the Big Ten, we're viewing it in light of what was the Big Ten's goal. for their objectives, it was a big payday.
Yeah.
Because now they have the LA market. And people say, well, why wouldn't they be interested in Oregon and Washington? Somebody texted me, a buddy of mine texted me that side. He's like, who do you think has the better program? And I was like, well, it doesn't matter. Like, I mean, it's like, it doesn't matter. Quality of the football programs is irrelevant.
Yeah.
I mean, UCLA was the best team last year of this. I mean, USC hasn't been good at football since 2017. And even that year, they weren't that good. They got blasted by Ohio State and got blasted by Notre Dame. The only two good teams they played all year. Yeah. They got embarrassed. And what happened in both games? They got dominated in the trenches. And Ohio State dominated them in the trenches even more on with their defense than Notre Dame's defense did. Although Notre Dame's defense pretty much shut them down as well. Notre Dame's offense dominated them more than Ohio State's offense that year because Notre Dame had an unreal offensive line in that game. But so this has been an issue for a while. But it's not about we added a great football tradition. That's not why they did that. Now, is that a side benefit? Yeah, it is. This is 100% about getting the LA market. That's what this is about. And they got the LA market, and so that they accomplished their goal. If USC is good, they don't give a rip about that. I really don't think they did. It's about the TV market. Now, if USC is good, there are benefits to it because now you have a second powerhouse that you can have in most likely in the division opposite Ohio State,
right?
Which it hasn't had. I mean, even when Iowa's been really good, they're not a powerhouse. Even when Wisconsin's been really good, they're not a powerhouse. USC can become a powerhouse, and I think that helps Ohio State when you look at years like, for example, when they went 12-1 in 2018 and didn't make it. If they go 12-1 now and beat USC in the Big Ten championship game, that's going to be much harder to keep a 12-1 Ohio State team out, no matter how bad they lost to Purdue in October, right? I mean, so I think it helps them a little bit as well. But it obviously has a crushing impact on the Pac-12. You now have two conferences that are basically their hearts were ripped out, and their bodies haven't quite figured it out yet, but they're dying and they're dead and there's no recovery. I just don't see a path forward. Even a merger of those two leagues, I just don't see a path forward. Like if they become like the third mega conference and the Pac-12 and the Big 12 merge, which they need to do, I just don't think you'll get a portion of the Dallas market, with not SMU, but with TCU and with, you get the Houston market, you'll get the Salt Lake City market because of Utah and BYU. You get the Seattle market, which is a decent market, but it's more of a pro town.
Yeah.
And then you get an emerging Arizona, Tempe and Phoenix and that market. You get that a little bit which I think is the only hope that they have. And then you've got a smaller market like Cincinnati, which, so the only hope they have to me is to just merge. They need to form the first super conference, in my opinion. I think the only chance they have to survive is to say, we got to get together and, they'll get the Denver market if they do that with Colorado, because Boulder's right outside Colorado. I think that's the only hope that they have, Sean, is for the Pac-12 and the Big 12 to form some sort of alliance, whether it's as one mega conference or some sort of partnership. And even then, I don't think they have a chance of surviving. What you're going to find is the leaders of those two conferences can talk all the way about a super conference, but what's going to happen is Kansas, Baylor, TCU, Oregon, Washington, they're all going to be begging the SEC and the Big Ten to take them.
Absolutely.
That's ultimately what's going to happen. So if the leadership is going to have to try to find some way to say, how do we get them to not leave and go? And I think, the only way you could do it is possibly, get schools to sign some sort of deal where if they leave, fine, but you have to pay some huge exit fee.
Yeah.
Which I don't know how you can retroactively enact that legally. I just don't know. I don't know the language of their contract or anything else like that to really know the answer to that. But they're going to have to do something because those teams they're not even on life support, Sean. Like they're dead. They just don't know it yet.
And what they solved was a lot of people. Joe Klatt said this week, and initially I didn't get the full scope of what he said. But he said one of the last obstacles to playoff expansion was the Rose Bowl.
Yeah.
And when he said it, I understood what he was saying, but I didn't get the full picture. And when the move was made, now I say to myself, the Big Ten was the big bad wolf to the SEC trying to get everything they wanted.
Right.
The CFP expansion.
Right.
They were the conference that stood up and said, no, you're not going to get what you want. And in doing so, they leveraged the Rose Bowl. But honestly, if we're going to keep it 100, for most Big Ten programs, the Rose Bowl was we're playing each other to see who's going to play USC and UCLA.
Right.
That was pretty much growing up what Big Ten teams expected. Every now and then you would throw in an Arizona State team with Jake Plummer.
Right.
Or a Washington team with Brock Heward. And
Oregon had a stretch there for a few
Oregon
years.
had a stretch. But the two main programs were always USC and UCLA that Big Ten teams expected to play in the Rose Bowl.
During our lifetime, when you and I were growing up, yes.
By bringing that tradition into the conference and also establishing the conference from coast to coast, which raises the amount of money you can get from TV now and different TV packages, streaming, the Big Ten Network, Big Ten Plus, with people outside of the area being able to watch their teams in basketball and football via streaming, and Big Ten Plus. All of that plays into this picture. And more than that, now it allows the Big Ten to feel more comfortable with removing that leverage of the Rose Bowl to say, okay, now we can talk about this expansion and the things that the SEC might want. And now with adding USC and UCLA, now the Big Ten can throw things on the table and say, we want this as well.
Right.
So it kind of evens the deal in the negotiations for the Big Ten to be able to look the SEC eye to eye and maybe hammer out the expansion to 8, 12, or 16, or wherever it's going to go. I'm not saying I like it.
Yeah.
But I understand now the big picture of the Big Ten recognized that they could not use the Rose Bowl as leverage for too much longer. They recognized that. So they had to find a way to get that West Coast in now before the next set of negotiations for the expansion.
I actually think the Big Ten didn't like the Rose Bowl because the Rose Bowl is the independence of the Rose Bowl is the Rose Bowl group leadership, whatever it is. They were the ones, from my understanding, that were standing firm and saying no, because they have a contract that they are going to be part of the playoff system, but they were not willing to.
Agree with that.
Yeah,
but it was leverage for them. It was always leverage for them.
Correct, but I think it's because what was really happening was that it was a power play by the Big. It was the Big Ten using that as a power play.
Yep.
Because I don't think they wanted expansion, playoff expansion, because I think they had to say, I don't think they looked at the thing that disappoints me is what we now know is my worst fear is true. Mm-hmm. My worst fear is when the SEC expanded that I hoped that the Big Ten would be the leadership to say we care about tradition. The Big Ten always talks about tradition, right? Oh, we care about tradition. But it's like he joined this alliance. It's like, Godfather 2, right? Like, you form this fake alliance and you're plotting the assassination of all the heads of the other 5 families, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And so that's really what Kevin Warren did. He brought the Pac-12 in to make them think, hey, you're our buddy. The whole time he plans to murder them, you know what I mean? And steal their best assets. That's exactly what he did. And that was my biggest fear, is that he was going to draw those leagues in, and then they were going to then say, we're going to beat SEC at their own game, as opposed to, because there was a thought that if the SEC, if the rest of the leagues don't come along with the SEC was going to go form their own thing. And I would have said, call their bluff, because you have Fox Sports trying to build up their market. Let ESPN just go run with their 24 teams.
Yeah. Right.
And then you do something different. But instead, the Big Ten said, like they always do, well, we want to be like the SEC, but better, and do it, differently. And we'll see your Oklahoma and Texas, and we'll raise you the LA market, and that's what they did. And I hate it, but it was always my worst fear. And to me, there's not going to be any talk about expansion until they're done raiding the other leagues, and they've killed I think their goal is to just kill the other leagues. The SEC the SEC and the Big Ten now have zero interest in doing anything to help the ACC. So this whole alliance that the Big Ten had was always a sham.
Yeah.
We feared it, but we kind of, maybe they might actually be people of their word. Nope. And they basically now they're trying to get North Carolina and Duke. We've read they've always wanted to kind of get those programs. And the SEC, and so then once they kind of pick at that carcass of the ACC, once they take Duke and North Carolina or whatever, then all of a sudden the SEC says, well, we'll see that and raise you Florida State and Clemson. You know what I mean? And that's what's going to happen. Okay, then Miami's like, well, what are we going to do now? Right? And then they jump in one of those things. And that's really where it's going. And the collateral damage that's about to happen to college athletics is that no one's willing to talk about. It's like a game to people. And it's about the TV money and all that kind of stuff. But here's my thing. Once this 40 to 48 to 64 team thing happens, the NCAA effectively dies, which part of me is okay with that. But part of me says what you have to understand and embrace, however, is, and this is what we never do, whether it's politics, sports, whatever, we never talk about the collateral damage. The reality is MAC schools, Sunbelt schools, Conference USA schools, AAC schools, all these teams left outside of this big powerhouse are going to lose all that money because ESPN and Fox didn't all of a sudden just invent money. I mean, I know that the government can print money, right? But Fox Sports can't and ESPN can't, right? What this money is saying, we're going to take our money from these things and we're going to put it over here.
Yeah.
And so all of a sudden, some belt teams are going to be down to FCS levels or Division II levels in scholarships because these schools were built on their budgets for having sports was built around NCAA money, sports, college playoff money that they would get a taste of, and then the millions that they would get every year by going and playing some Power 5 team.
Right.
That's how their scholarships are paid for. That's how their coaches were paid for. They're going to end up being Division II teams. It's going to be the big football and then Division II and all the others. But say, well, it'll still here's why that matters. All of a sudden, there's not 85 scholarships at Florida International. There's 65 or 50 or 40. And then you add that over to, let's say it's a 48-team league. Now there's 70-plus teams at the FBS level that now don't have football, and they're going to lose 20 to 30 scholarships a year. Unless and they say, well, so how many kids is that, Sean, that now all of a sudden don't have scholarships? And it's not just football. All of a sudden, these other sports don't have the money.
Absolutely.
And when the NCAA dies, Title IX is going to be a lot harder to manage, right? And all of a sudden, all these other sports lose scholarships and they lose money. And all of a sudden, you've got what's going to happen is not people think it's going to be like the group of 5 is going to go off and do their own thing. Nobody's going to pay them to be on there. No TV contracts. Hey, we got to get the Mountain West and Sun Belt and all. They're going to be left with nothing. And eventually it's basically going to be, you've got Division I and Division III. Yeah. And that's essentially what's going to kind of boil down to. And there's going to be thousands and thousands of kids every year that no longer have the ability to go use their athletic talent to leverage an education. And that is because that's what happens for most kids outside of the Power 5, the elite of the elite. Most of these kids are using their athletic ability to leverage themselves to get an education that a lot of them can't afford without taking out hundreds of thousands of dollars of loans. And that's the reality of it. And the fact that so many people are perfectly fine with that saddens me and angers me. And I'm talking about our fans too.
Yeah.
Well, hey, look, as long as we're not left outside, and that's like, is that what we've come to now? That as long as we're not affected, we don't give a crap what happens to anybody else? That's what this is turning into, Sean. And it disgusts me, to be honest with you. The leadership is the ones driving this bus. They either are too stupid to know this, which I don't believe to be true, or they don't care, which is worse to me.
And you never know how far-reaching the impact of a decision like this is until it hits home. Right. Fortunately, for those of you that don't know, I have a daughter that attends USC. As soon as the news came down, she happened to be in town, and she said, "Man, I don't know what's going to happen to my friends on the water polo team." Mm-hmm. And I said, because I don't know too many Big Ten schools that have a water polo team. That's more than likely a strictly Pac-12 West Coast, maybe like Southern sport. And it's like, what happens to those teams? Do they become part of an individual club that just travels around Will they still be on scholarship? I don't know if that was thought out, but that's one of the major decisions, or one of the impacts of a decision like that impacts individuals, like you spoke about, with teams and athletes outside of the big two, which is college basketball and college football, being affected by the decision. And unfortunately, I mean, that is kind of a reflection of society in a way.
Right.
Where the little guy just kind of,
and no one cares.
Yeah.
And other little guys who aren't as impacted are like, well, hey, I'm still getting my crumbs.
Right.
So I'm okay with it.
Right.
It really is sad. And the people and this kind of goes back to the media aspect. It used to be where the media was the third rail, right? Like but now with everything, it's sports is especially, they're in bed with the decision makers because it's like, so am I supposed to believe that a journalist at ESPN or Fox Sports is going to do a true investigative piece on the impact that this is going to have? Like we just no, because they're going against their own interests, which is the sad part, and over the years, ESPN has kind of swallowed up all these others where there is no sports journalism on a national scale outside of ESPN, really, that anybody cares about.
Do you blame the meat? You have to blame the NCAA and the presidents.
Oh, the NCAA,
for things getting to this point.
The NCAA at the heart of it is to blame.
Yes.
Because we've always known that there was greed at ESPN and all those other kind of things. That's always been true. But there was enough leadership to kind of push back on this notion. But over the last 20 years especially, there's been this thing that is kind of like you've seen more and more of because the money's gotten so big, it's like, I'm going to stand on my principles until the money gets to this point, then I don't care anymore.
Yeah.
That's what it's turned into. Like, hey, I'm going to take a firm stand. Oh, what does that check say? Oh, no, I'm taking a firm stand. You can't buy me. Oh, you added 2 more zeros? Well, I kind of see your point now. I think we can go along with this. And that's the reality of it, because these school presidents don't care. Because what COVID especially, it's not a surprise that a lot has happened after COVID. And we talked a little bit about this yesterday. Because what happened was the schools lost a lot of revenue from TV money and all these other things. They realized we're living outside of our means. And if we lose that TV money, then we're screwed.
Right.
And because college institutions are by and large not run by businessmen who understand how to, turn a profit with their product as opposed to just taking outside money, right?
Yeah.
That they realize, like, how the TV, as opposed to changing your business structures, you can live more feasibly. Yeah. They said, well, let's go get more TV money.
Right.
And that's kind of what it's come down to, is like, I mean, they don't even all these other sports, like, you're going to pretend to be when these kids in baseball are going to be traveling from USC to Minnesota and Wisconsin and all that. And they're going to just, they can take classes online, right? Yeah. Oh, that's fine. But just admit that you don't give a crap about academics anymore. Let's just stop playing this game. Right. Because here's the other thing. I have been staunchly against the notion of paying players. Staunchly against it. I'm fine with NIL. That's different. I'm talking about the schools directly paying players for, where you're basically turning them into employees. At this point in time, if I'm players and I'm seeing the money that's being thrown around and the fact that now I have to be traveling across the freaking country all the time, right? Because if I wanted to play in the Midwest, I would have signed with a Big Ten school, right?
Yes. Yes.
You know what? No, sorry. We want a bigger piece of this pie now.
The TV money.
Right.
I want a piece of the TV money.
You have clearly shown that you don't give a crap about the academic part of it. So here's something that's always bothered me. I have always hated the response of people say, well, players should be played. Players should be paid. And I've always hated that notion, because, like, somebody even compared it to slavery the other day, and I wanted to reach through the Twitter and because it's like, if every college football player decided, hey, I'm going to boycott, I'm not going to play this year, there'd be however many scholarships available of kids that would be jump at the chance to take that, right?
Right.
So it's a really bad example. And they say, well, scholarship has no value. Okay, cool. Let's start paying players, but then take away the scholarship, and they have to pay for their own they have to pay their scholarship and room and board. No, that's not fair. Okay, so then clearly a scholarship has value, right? The education has value. But when you make decisions as an institution, as individually and as a whole, to basically where you have devalued the educational aspect to the degree that they have, then I can no longer support you leveraging that as revenue. Because what anyone that understands business understands that I am going to offer you this goods and service for your whatever, right? So you're going to give me your athletic talent and I'm going to give you this. That is value. It may not be, I can put it into my bank account value, but anyone that understands economic policy knows that's value. And anyone arguing against that doesn't understand the original, commerce of trade, right? But you have now devalued the part that you're supposedly offering to the degree that it no longer carries the same value. And it hasn't for a long time, but now they're not even pretending that it matters anymore. So now I'm to the point where I'm like, you know what? I'm tired of this. So let's take all this extra money. And if I'm the players, I'm at the point now where I'm ready for them to make a big move. Because at the end of the day, they're the ones being killed by this, Sean. These people, these kids that are going to lose scholarships, and these kids are going to have to deal with all this traveling all over the country now. And the NFL does it. That's a freaking professional football league. Why does everybody want to turn college athletics? If you like the NFL so much, just watch the freaking NFL.
And that was one of the aspects that I always wanted to point out, just as a student, how challenging it was to manage time. Can you imagine and with the media has become more,
right,
even more greedy as far as taking up the time of these players with requests during the week for interviews and podcasts. And we have to get you on this program. We have to get you on this national program to promote the game. And it's way more than it used to be. And with all of that being said, and everything that you ask of these athletes, you still want them to be fantastic students.
Right.
As well as fantastic athletes on the field every Saturday.
But they don't, though. You and I know that, right? You and I were talking about with Myron Roll, and there's a lot of coaches say, look, man, you're here to play football. So let's go take this easy class and let's go take that easy class. And remember when Jim Harbaugh was ripping Michigan back in the day for the fact that like majority of their team was like taking general education? Like teams don't hide it anymore. And that's the disgusting thing. But if you're not going to, the point is if the scholarship no longer has the same value, then players should have the right to stay. Well, look, yes, before you were offering me a scholarship that had value. That value is not there anymore because I can't get the same kind of education. Because the reality is if to truly get an education, in my view, you need to be able to go see the professor, ask questions, engage, dialogue, talk to students, have study groups, all those type of things. And so, that's kind of where I look at it. And so, again, these are all the unintended consequences that are going to come down the road.
Yeah.
That's the reality of this whole thing. And that's the thing that disgusts me is because we are seeing the death of what is a great sport. And it's basically going to become NFL light. You're going to have one conference on one network and one conference on the other network. And I had a guy that I know pitched this to me. He goes, this is how it's going to go, Brian. This is his prediction. You're going to end up seeing ESPN have the SEC, which is going to eat up the ACC and others. The Fox is going to kind of take on all these other teams. And so then these two conferences are going to break off into divisions, which are going to look just like the freaking conferences did before. But what's going to happen is you're going to have, 24 to 30 teams in one and 24 to 30 teams in the other. And eventually they're going to have their own playoff and then they're going to have their own Super Bowl is what it's going to turn into.
So basically what you're saying is the Big Ten and SEC championship games would basically be a 4-team format, which will give you your 8 teams in the college football playoff. And there you have it.
Right.
And the survivors of that play each other for the national championship.
Right.
Wow.
Pretty much. I mean, that's now again, it could look a little differently, but that's what it's basically going to come down to.
Yeah.
And all the other sports are going to get kind of, completely fall by the wayside.
Yeah.
Especially as the NCAA died. But at the end of the day, we talked about the greed and all these other kind of things, but that's what the NCAA was supposed to do. If you go back and look at the foundation of the NCAA, it was meant to be a sort of the police of college athletics. But again, as the money got bigger and bigger and bigger, and the reality is Sean, as you and I both know, it's like with anything that was once powerful that has fallen, whether it be a government, the mob, whatever. A lot of times it boils down to you had crap leadership, right? I mean, you had crap leadership. You had people that had jobs because of reasons that they didn't belong in that job, right? And that's what's happened to the NCAA is they have had a string of just terrible leadership. And it's not just the president. I mean, I think Emmert's been awful, but it's also the people under him. Usually awful people hire awful underlings, right? And it's been all of that, so you're going to hammer Notre Dame for self-reporting a violation that they could have easily just brushed under the rug like everybody else. Yet you're going to let some of the other stuff that goes on be perfectly fine, right? It's just because you don't even try to hide the fact that you are a joke now.
Yeah.
And the cowardice that they showed in the face of just sort of the shifts that were inevitably going to happen as the money got bigger, these idiots genuinely thought that we can keep the same percentage of the pie that we've always had and everyone's going to be okay with it. And they were always so late to respond. Like the Ed O'Bannon thing should have never happened.
No.
Should have never happened.
No.
There's no reason that the NCAA should have been like, you know what? Like, here's what we'll do. That's a good idea. Ed, this is something we're going to do. As the money gets bigger, we're perfectly okay. If EA Sports wants to pay you $150,000, that should go to your players.
Which at that point in time was pennies.
Yes, and the NCAA should have mandated that. If you're going to sell jerseys, you have to make sure that a portion of it, you don't have to give it to the players directly, like the player whose jersey is being sold, but you have to put X amount of dollars of your jerseys into an account that your players get at the end of the year, right? Or when they graduate. I mean, you could have done so many different things with that.
You can treat it as a scholarship.
Right.
If I get a full scholarship and that scholarship amount is over the amount that I pay for room and board and my education, I get a refund check.
Right.
As a regular student.
Right.
Through the university. It could be formed as a scholarship and they get it back as part of the refund once they've paid tuition, room, and board. There are a lot of different ways they could have gone about doing it.
Right. And they held on. Like, I'm a big believer in amateurism, big believer in it. I've always just felt that the way that the NCAA defined it was stupid and so obviously skewed towards them not having to give money away to players. And I'm those old that made it off the back. The reality is it's not made off the backs of players because it's not like the professional sports where if every kid at Notre Dame decided, screw it, I'm going to leave, there'd be 85 football players out there, 850 football players out there dying a chance to put on a gold helmet. Right. It is the power of the institutions, but it's also the players have to then put on the jerseys and go play. It's meant to be a mutually beneficial situation that has turned into a far more beneficial in the other direction. And I have always hated the idea of the paying players thing because there's so many negatives come to that. But there are ways to do that without doing that. And that's the thing is like amateurism doesn't have to be killing amateurism doesn't have to mean kids getting paid as employees, and being an amateur doesn't mean you can't benefit. You know what I mean? Like the whole notion of it, I'm okay with amateurism in theory, but you have to define it correctly. And every single time they would just not react and not make decisions. And then they would go to courts and just keep losing, or they keep winning. So it's like they kept winning and they weren't smart enough to know that there's going to be a cultural shift where, some president is able to elect a higher number of justices that are going to fit a certain thing, or the judicial system in general starts to see shifts in different areas and they could never read the room.
Yeah.
And so because they got kind of complacent with the victories they did have, they didn't see the changes that were coming and they should have been able to head them off. But then that would have required A, good leadership, and B, a willingness to share a piece of the pie with players and student athletes where you could have maintained the integrity of the academic part of the student athlete, but also made sure that we say, we're going to take care of these young people who are really that's the entertaining aspect is the coaches and the players. Right. And so coaches have been cared for, and I have no problem with coaches making money because at the end of the day, the one constant year after year after year is the coach, not the players, because the players turn over every single year. But it just comes down to the fact that there was just no leadership from an NCAA standpoint. And the NCAA is made up of the institutions. I mean, that's the other thing is the NCAA is not made up of individuals that have nothing to do with the colleges. The colleges are the NCAA. Go look at who the board is. It's people that work at colleges by and large.
Yeah.
And it all came down to that.
This is why the best advice is to never partake of the forbidden fruit.
Right.
There was nothing wrong with Oklahoma and other schools, filing suit against the NCAA to control their own rights and go and find their own TV deals. But ultimately, the corruption that exists in people will find a way to corrupt what was meant for good and to give individual schools the rights to promote their product, to help them in recruiting, and make the overall sport better.
Right.
At some point, when everything started to go awry, there needs to be someone in the room to say, you know what, we need to stop, say we're wrong, and get this train back on the tracks. What did they do? They chose to make more money so they could cover up what they were doing. The NCAA really tried to turn themselves into mob bosses that were skimming off the top.
Yeah.
They tried to turn it into Vegas back in the days.
Right.
And when everything got out of hand, then they decided to walk away and just have a fit and out about how things got to this point. It got to this point because of your decisions.
Right.
And not taking care of business. They got caught with the O'Bannon case.
Mm-hmm.
They should have said, you know what? You're right. We haven't handled this correctly. From this day forth, this is what we're going to do.
But see, here's where they're stupid, though, Sean. They should have never let it get to court. Because if you lose that, and this is where I said they got a little bit fat because of all the court cases they had won previously.
Yeah.
Right? But the TV thing should have been the eye-opener for them, that there's a shift that's happening.
Right.
Because the way it used to be is the NCAA controlled all the TV. But then it came a point in time where conferences could then do their own thing. And that's when the NCAA lost. The NCAA should have reacted with something where they then got the conferences to agree to something.
Yeah.
But instead, they just, because they were so woefully unprepared for what was going to happen to them, and they never reacted. They just kind of let it happen. And then they said, well, we can't do anything about that. Right. And this is a notion that I despise so much about what has become in our country. Well, that's the way it is. So I'm just going to deal with it. No, no. But that's what the NCAA did. Well, we lost that one. So we'll just take advantage of it. Like you said, we'll get our cut of these different things and stuff like that. Instead of, they should have found out a way to say, like, could you imagine this? Like if they did something where they said, you know what, like we're going to come to some agreement with the leagues and all these different type of things where we can somewhat create some sort of revenue share, like they have in professional sports. Because that's the whole thing about why this is such a bad comparison to the NFL is there are much stricter rules in place for things in professional sports than there are, especially like National Football League, than there's in college football, which is why you have some level of parity, right? That doesn't exist in college sports the way that it's run. And so instead of saying, hey, we're going to make sure that we don't let this get out of hand the way it's going to go, that they should have said, we're going to force colleges to, because here's all this thing. So make them put their money where their mouths are. So if these colleges say that they care about academics and stuff, the NCAA should have challenged them and said, okay, fine. If you really care about this, then here's what we're going to ask that you do. We're going to ask that the ESPN only negotiate with this entity, and we'll come to something as collectively as a group. And so we hear your complaints, we hear this, we hear that, but the SEC doesn't care. The SEC doesn't care what happens to the Big Ten or the Big East or the ACC, because it became about what you said, Sean. It's all about, we're going to get ours. I don't care what it does to anybody else. We're going to get ours.
Yes.
And it's crushed it. And the fact that there was no governing body, it's like people say, well, they need a commissioner in college football. They have one. It's Mark Emmert.
Yeah.
He's the freaking president of this whole thing. And he sat back and just, was a complete and then it's like he would do stupid things. Like when they found out that the women's college basketball players weren't getting the same warm-up equipment, all this other stuff, and then everybody lost their minds, he then reacts by then giving them what they need. You just look like an idiot. You should have said, hey, here's why this is the case, because this sport generates this much money and this sport generates that much money. So the sport that generates that much money is where we're going to put our resources. Now, it would have been a bad excuse, but it wouldn't look like you were freaking purposely doing this. Yeah. And you always had the money to do that.
Yeah.
And that's where that's poor leadership. That's just stupidity.
And it's almost like just a bad mindset It doesn't matter what you change around a bad mindset. The mindset is going to ruin or be bad wherever it is.
Right.
Right. So like you said, oh, you got budget problems. We need more money. No, you need the budget better.
Right. Exactly.
Could
you imagine
more money?
What if your daughter did that to you, Sean? She came up to you, she said, "Hey, Dad, I need more money." What do you mean you need more money? Yeah, I'm out of money by Wednesday. I need more money. No.
Make better decisions.
Right.
That's what you need to learn how to do. Make better decisions. And this is what the NCAA failed to do. Look, like you said, the horse was out of the barn. It was out of the barn with the bowl system.
Right.
So what's the illusion to the fan? Oh, we need to change to the BCS.
Right.
Keep you guys fixated on this and make sure the right team wins. Meanwhile, we're still doing the same thing over here in the BCS system. Oh, the BCS system needs to change. We're going to make it right, fans. We're going to keep the tradition. We're going to make college football what it's supposed to be. We'll give you the national championship game.
Right. Playoff.
The playoff, the tournament you've been asking for. Meanwhile, the entire system is crumbling.
Yes.
Crumbling.
Yes. Yeah.
And
it's like you're playing games, and you're playing games in the Colosseum in ancient Rome while everything around you is falling apart.
Yes.
But in Rome, it was all good, and it didn't. It's like the whole empire was slowly collapsing on itself.
Yeah.
And but everybody in Rome was living fat and happy, unawares of what was happening around them. And that's what's happening in college football, because the money may be there now, but I still question the validity of these TV networks being able to afford these deals they're handing out in 5 to 10 years. And then what happens? You've now crushed everything else that involves your sport. Now what are you doing?
Yeah.
And so to me, that's a big thing too, is based on, I mean, look, you got to be able to look at this. ESPN is hemorrhaging this stuff. All they have now is games. That's the only thing saving them is the games. And once those kind of things happen, then, then what happens? Then the sport dies.
Yeah.
And that's the concern.
Yeah.
Because eventually you're going to alienate enough people to where, because like what you think is, it's not just Notre Dame fans watching Notre Dame fans, it's college football fans who may be Florida, international fans or San Jose State fans or whatever else may be. And they're going to be so offended by this that you're going to lose it's like you and I were talking about last night about Major League Baseball. Everybody thinks these major sports are untouchable.
No.
And Sean, growing up, you and I would have said that about Major League Baseball.
Yep.
It was when you and I were kids, late 80s, early 90s, the NBA was kind of coming along. The NFL was big, but it wasn't like it is now.
Right.
College sports was big, but not like it is now. It was Major League Baseball was it. It was America's pastime. And those idiots generally thought they could cancel the World Series with no consequences or repercussions. They've never come back from that.
Nope.
They've never come back from that.
No.
And
they want to try and come up with all type of marketing schemes and this
juice balls, taking it. Yeah, none of that matters.
Humidors and
yeah. None of that matters. You lost a generation of fans.
Yep.
And there's no change to the game that, and usually the things that they do are things that end up then turning off even more of your traditional fans.
Yeah.
And they start, like, especially baseball, like there's just more, we need to attract fans that don't like, those people are not going to stay. It's like, if you and I open a restaurant and all of our goals are built on, we need to get as many first-time customers in there as possible without then making sure that we're also making the loyal customers, but the loyal customers, right? Yes. Like we need to make sure that the loyal base grows,
right? And
then we can do things to attract the first-timers without alienate our base, because eventually you run out of first-time customers.
First-time customers, yeah.
And it just amazes me that how some of these people, it's like, how do these people get here? How do these people have such a basic lack of economics, you know what I mean? Or understanding of the game. Okay, that's right. You put someone who doesn't understand the game here. So they're just looking at it. Or you get these business people who don't know the game.
Yeah.
And then they start making deals that are just about business, and they don't understand what makes the games. They don't understand fans. They don't understand loyalty. They don't understand all this stuff. Because if y'all think that this tradition is just like, eventually there's people in our chat. I'll just take it because I love the game. Oh, that's fine. You got more. It's a free country. Yeah. You don't have to agree with us. You can love all of this stuff.
Right.
But you also have to understand that there's a lot of people that are going to be like, you know what? Screw it. Forget it. I don't care. And if I can't tell the difference between the NFL and the college football, then I'm just going to watch the NFL. You know, at least I know what's going on there.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, it's
what did we both say yesterday? We're Notre Dame fans. But our first experiences of a college game day came at other places.
Right. Yours was at Michigan. Mine was at Ohio State.
Michigan at a Michigan State game, throwing a Nerf ball as we sat there pregame and postgame on the Michigan golf course. And I told you, watching Anthony Carter, he took one back in a punt return. Ali Haji Sheik, before he ended up going to the Giants. Like, this is a memory that you never forget. This is college football. And even though we're Notre Dame fans, we encourage people to be fans of college football.
Right.
Because it's a fantastic sport. You know, I can't stand the Michigan Wolverines as a Notre Dame fan. But let me tell you something. I would tell any college football fan to go partake of a game at Michigan State.
Yeah.
If you love college football, go watch one. Go watch a game in Michigan Stadium. Go to Neyland Stadium. Go to Husky Stadium. Pull up to the game on a boat if you can. Go to the Grove. I've had that experience. And walk the Grove down at Ole Miss. College football is absolutely fantastic.
It is. It was.
Yeah, and every year we said we find a team besides Notre Dame somehow to watch. Right. 4 or 5 times that we probably never thought we were going to watch.
Right.
Every year.
Right.
That's college football.
But see, I think something that people are missing is my guy Mark said, you know, the memories will still be there, but not really.
No.
I mean, you can't just kill tradition. You can't kill the things.
Have memories. I'm not
right.
dead.
Right. But the point is like what he's saying is like, you know, kids will go through the same thing you guys went to, and I don't think so. I don't, because the fan bases aren't the same. The traditions aren't the same. Like, what do you grow up as a Notre Dame fan? It's the Michigan Notre Dame rivalry, the USC rivalry. You grow up with, you know, and those things are all dying, right? I mean, like you said, yours is watching Anthony. I still remember Scotty Graham running all over Wisconsin in my first college football game.
Yeah.
You know, and then I remember the turf field and the shoe and seeing a big Michigan flag flying, thinking like, well, that's interesting, a Michigan fan. And then you look at it and it's like, you know, underneath it's like sucks, and you know, like you realize, wow, this whole tailgating thing is insane. Like these people are, but like now that will still be there.
Yeah.
But it's the event may be the same, but the love for what makes the sports unique is what, like, I fell in love with the game day experience, you know, or I was attracted by the game day experience, but I fell in love with the tradition.
Yeah.
With the rivalries, all that. And it's like, it's all gone. You know, it's like what's the Rose Bowl now going to be? The Big Ten championship game?
Pretty much.
I mean, you know, it's like, so that's the fear that maybe it doesn't change, but that's the fear when you do this, is that you turn it into this. And then again, it goes back to these 40 teams that survive may be just fine. But what about the 90 that don't? And all the kids, and I don't care about the schools, because you know what, you brought this on, like the Pac-12. I don't feel bad for the Pac-12. You started this. When you tried to poach Texas a decade ago, you started this, right? And so I don't feel bad for you. You know, you tried to kill the Big 12. Screw you. I don't care. But it's not about the Pac-12. It's the game that I think bothers me. And so that's kind of what saddens me.
When you take the beauty of fandom away. This is me. I tell you how my wife and daughter have to leave the house before every game.
Oh, yeah.
Like, they already know.
Right.
Like, Notre Dame's coming on. We're leaving for about 3 to 4 hours.
Mm-hmm.
Right? If Notre Dame loses the way things are now,
right,
I'll take it. That's part of my fandom.
Right.
I'll go through that anger on the back end.
Right.
And I'll wake up Sunday and I'll be okay. It'll stay with me a little bit, but I'll be okay.
Mm-hmm.
Now, if Notre Dame loses, like, oh, we're Notre Dame. We're still good for the playoffs.
Right.
We can lose 2 games. Doesn't
Right.
matter. Long as we're in there, long as we make it in, that's all we want to do. We just want to make it in. No, I don't want to be the 16th seed.
Right.
I don't want to be the 12th seed.
Mm.
No, I don't want Notre Dame to be the 10th seed.
I mean, Sean, that's what frustrated you and I so much about Brian Kelly.
Yeah.
Is the attempt to sort of eliminate what made Notre Dame special and unique. You know?
Yeah.
And there's people that say, you know, oh, you'll still watch. I'm just telling you right now. I was already on the verge of it just becoming a job. With the deeper that Brian Kelly's tenure went, just the more it became just a job. And that passion was gone. And, you know, it's been rejuvenated a little bit the last year.
Yeah.
But it was getting to that point. Look, that happens to people. And for some people, like my guy Mark, it may not change. And there will be no one agrees on everything. I mean, and that's the reason that we're discussing this here is because we know there's people that are going to dislike what we're having to say. Well, okay. Right. That's okay. Yeah. But don't kid yourself to think that everyone's going to be on board with this. The question is, will enough people not be on board to make a change? You see it in business. Businesses do things to cater to one group of people because they think, well, if we get them to shut up and get off our backs, everyone else is just going to go along for the ride. And then you realize, oh, wow, these other people are pretty pissed about this. We didn't realize we're going to get that pushback. Yeah. Eventually, the people that you've been kind of just pushing around and showing that you don't care, eventually they're going to say, you know what, screw you.
Yeah,
I'm done. And that's what baseball did. Because it wasn't just like there were several strikes and different things that happened in baseball. And that's what almost cost football was all the strikes and stuff like that.
Yeah.
But baseball had kind of done some things to the fans over time. It was just like, you know, we kept coming back. And it got to the point where they thought, you know what, we can cancel the World Series. And they'll come back because they always come back. And you know what? They didn't come back.
Yeah.
And I hope that it doesn't get to that point with college football because I love it. It's how I make my livelihood.
Yeah.
I don't want it to just become a job. I don't. It's something it's the reason I do. I'm passionate about it. I love it. And I just hate the fact that there's so many people who only see it as a payday and do not have any desire to hold true to what makes it special. Right? That's why I despise Roger Goodell so much. I don't think he gives a crap about the NFL and the tradition and the history.
Yeah.
He's just out there, you know, it's his own ego and making money and all this other kind of stuff. There's nothing that's like, hey, I'm fighting for. It's like Mark and the Manfred guy that runs Major League is even worse.
Yeah.
It's like he gives 0 F's about the tradition of the game. And guess what's happened? They're struggling. And they've been struggling for a long time.
Let me ask you this question. I want you to think about this and tell me how you feel. There's nothing like the weekend of Thanksgiving. And you got Alabama, Auburn, Notre Dame, USC, and all of those traditional games that more than likely mean something to the national landscape. Everything has expanded. You turn on the TV, it's Notre Dame, USC. Notre Dame is sitting at 11-1. And Marcus Freeman says, we're good. We're in the tournament. So we're going to rest Tyler Buckner this week. We're going to rest our starters and prepare for the playoffs.
Yep.
You liking that? Because it's coming.
Right. Oh, yes.
It's coming with this expansion.
Yeah.
It's coming.
Because if you're Notre Dame, you're not getting a top 4 seed anyway.
Right. And I want the same energy that the same fans have for the NBA.
Right.
And other teams.
And the NFL.
And the NFL that partake in this when it hits college football. And that last weekend means absolutely nothing. I want the same energy.
Yeah.
I want the same energy.
Yeah.
When your starters are being rested against USC that last weekend.
Yeah. And Sean, that's been you and I's pushback against the playoff expansion from the beginning is you're going to kill the regular season if you don't do this right.
Absolutely.
Expansion by itself does not kill the regular season. There's a way to expand to enhance the regular season. We've talked about that. But and this is what I was told by somebody that I knew that kind of has an idea of what's going on, and he said that there was actually a push by some to kind of do it the way that we've talked about it. where you enhance the bowl system and then use the bowl system as your expanded playoff, essentially. Not in the way they're doing it now, where it's like, but go back to the old bowl system as just the bowl system. And then, so you're playing to get to the Rose Bowl and the Orange Bowl. And then from there, we'll take our 4 playoff teams. There was some kind of, or maybe it'd just be a +1 kind of thing or something along those lines.
Yeah.
But you know who killed it? The networks, because they couldn't agree on who was going to cover what games and who was going to have access to this and all this other kind of stuff.
Yep.
And that's what it all boils down to. It's all greed.
Yeah.
It's like, and they're willing to sacrifice the regular season because, like the NCAA, they make so much money off the NCAA tournament that doesn't matter that nobody gives a crap about college basketball until the conference championship games start. Nobody cares.
And most people don't watch the NBA until the playoffs.
No.
Casual fans.
I'm like that with the NFL.
Yeah.
And really now it's just the championship games, not even the wild cards. Just don't care.
Yeah.
And so you've lost that passion for your, to me, it's like, you could kind of grow up and there'd be players that were always going to be a part of the team you rooted for.
Yeah.
And now it's like, you're lucky if you have 1 guy or 2 guys. And usually the guy that you have is because his contract is so bad, nobody else wants him.
Right.
Absolutely. And that's just kind of how it is. And eventually you're going to kind of lose sight of what makes the game unique, Sean. And that's your point. It's like you talk about the Thanksgiving. It was one of my favorite games I always looked forward to growing up on Thanksgiving. Like almost every year, it was always the Texas A&M game. And it went away. Why? Because Texas A&M decided they wanted SEC money. And I understand it, because they wanted SEC money because of how greedy and how manipulative Texas was, and they were in the Big 12. So I won't part of this anymore.
Yeah.
And, and the Pac-12 gave Texas a lot of that because of their pursuit of Texas allowed the Pac-12 that allowed Texas to kind of manipulate some things where they got more control in the Big 12. Yeah. And that was their thing to keep them there.
Yeah.
And then, shocker that a decade later, Texas now does it again. And, and here's what's, because at the end of the day, we could blame all, at the end of the day, the people that I hold responsible are the presidents.
Yeah.
Because at the end of the day, this is on you. This is on you. Do you care about academic integrity? Nope. Do you care about doing what's best for the young people? Nope. You do care about the integrity of the game, the tradition of the game? Nope. You just care about making money.
Yeah.
And that's what it all boiled down to. And, that's kind of where it gets disheartening a little bit, to be honest with you. I'll still cover it. We'll still talk about it and all that kind of stuff. But I hope that I hope we're wrong. I do. I hope we're wrong. I hope that something happens to make it better and make the game better. That's ultimately what I want. I want it to be better.
Steps up with integrity.
Sure. Well, maybe the greedy people make the right decisions. You know what I mean? Like even though it's greedy and it sucks, they're still going to do something that makes the game great. It's happened before, not often, but maybe it does.
Yeah.
That's my hope. But, it's just one of those ones, Sean, where I feel, boy, I hope I'm wrong.
Well, we seem to be at the eye of this storm. And
right.
Notre Dame.
Right.
Right. Everything's swirling around. Rumors about Oregon sitting in wait because the Big Ten is waiting on Notre Dame.
Mm-hmm.
Where does Notre Dame go from here?
Yeah.
We talked about this for about a good hour. Specifically yesterday.
Well, let's go over the options, Sean, right?
Yeah, yeah.
And obviously one is standing pat. Standing pat meaning you stay independent, but standing pat does not mean you do nothing.
Right.
Because if you sit back and do nothing, then you're going to be left out in the cold.
Well, they have decisions to make.
Right. Standing pat meaning you're going to stay independent.
Yeah.
But then what do? Right? The option 2 is to join a league. And then from there, it's basically there's 3 options. You can join either the Big Ten or the SEC.
Yeah.
And just say, we see where this is going, and we're going to be in on the floor, the ground level of this. Or B, you join a conference and it's the ACC because you want to try to stem the tide of this.
Right.
And you're going to try to use your considerable power to do something to maintain it, right? And then, option 4 is to withdraw yourself from it. And Notre Dame's not going to do that because Notre Dame isn't driven by TV money, but they still want TV money. They just don't need it to the degree that others do, right?
Right.
When Father Jenkins was like, we'll stop being part of – okay, sure, buddy, whatever you say. Yeah. Because if Father Jenkins tried to say, well, we're going to withdraw from college sports because they're paying players now, like, well, time to vote on a new president. That's what would happen, right? So it comes down to, Sean, Notre Dame has to make a decision on how important is independence to who we are.
Mm-hmm.
And to me, I still think it's incredibly important. And I think it's what's funny is you get a lot of these non-Notre Dame fans who jump into chats or onto Twitter and they say these absurd things. And it's not all. Some get it. There's fans of other teams that get the tradition of the game like we do.
Yeah.
But then you get these other idiots that don't. And they say things like, well, Notre Dame should be like everybody else. And I'm like, that's exactly why Notre Dame should value independence. Because part of the brand that makes Notre Dame unique is its independence.
Yes.
And if Notre Dame loses that, then they're Penn State. They're Nebraska.
Yeah.
And Penn's for different reasons. Nebraska was always in a conference, but they were in a conference where that their tradition was entrenched in, right? And then once they sold that out, it's like, okay, why should I care about Nebraska anymore?
Yeah.
I could give two rips about the Nebraska-Wisconsin rivalry or Nebraska-Iowa rivalry or whatever. I don't care about that. I missed the Nebraska-Oklahoma game. That's what I cared about.
Right.
That's the game I wanted to see. I wanted to watch Nebraska-Colorado last game of the year. I didn't care. I don't care about Nebraska and Iowa playing.
Yeah.
Because that's not a traditional game.
No.
It's like Bob Diaco trying to, create a rivalry with UCF out of nowhere because it's like for some stupid, insane reason. You just can't create rivalries out of nowhere. You know what I mean? And so to me, it's kind of like by joining a conference, there's two objectives for these conferences to get Notre Dame into their league. Number one, you get the immediate boost in power and revenue by having Notre Dame. Two, you then undercut Notre Dame. And they no longer have they can no longer wield as big of a stick as they have in the past.
Yeah.
Because the reality is Notre Dame could always wield a really big stick by itself. Because at the end of the day, it didn't have another conference, even when it was tied into the Big East, now the ACC. End of the day, football's been the money driver. Like there was somebody arguing earlier, like, oh, North Carolina schools will be fine because they got basketball. If basketball mattered in this thing, why is the ACC in trouble? There is no richer basketball tradition than what's in the ACC.
Yeah.
Why are they in trouble? Why is the Pac-12 in trouble? There's some tradition in the Pac-12, especially with UCLA, Arizona, tons of tradition in that league. Why are they not able to generate big TV deals? Because it's about football. Why did the Big East die? If basketball was a revenue driver, why did the Big East die?
Yeah.
Why did they leave for the ACC? And then why is the ACC still dying? Because football is the money the money train. Right? It's the deal. And Notre Dame, when Notre Dame loses that authority to wield a big stick because they now have to act in concert with the conference that they're a part of, then they've been neutered to a degree. And that's what a lot of people want. That's what you all have to understand. This isn't about football. No. This is about power. And people want the benefit that comes from Notre Dame, but they want to take Notre Dame's power away. That's what you have to understand. Jack Swarbrick can no longer be part of the playoff committee and advocate for Notre Dame anymore. It's now, well, we're part of the Big Ten, so we'll let the Big Ten commissioner handle it. Or we're part of the SEC, let the SEC.
Right.
And they want that. These big conferences want that. What I think Notre Dame needs to do, Sean, is fight as long as it can for independence. And the only things, in our opinion, and Sean and I talked about this, Sean, so let's give the reasons of the things that would ultimately force Notre Dame's hand, right? And the first one is scheduling.
Yep. Scheduling is one. The next one would be a path that will be blocked.
Right.
A viable path to the college football playoff.
Mm-hmm.
If they are put in a position where those two conferences make it really tough for Notre Dame to get a respected path to the college football playoff, then Notre Dame may be forced. And last but not least, not having a viable national broadcasting partner.
Right. Let's explain the first one, Sean, scheduling. It's simple.
Yeah.
They can't, because of rules made by these two leagues, they can no longer put together a 12-game schedule that gives it a chance, because all these give them, the first two are passed to the postseason.
Yeah.
There's two ways the path can be blocked. The second one is easy, as you mentioned, Sean, is they make a rule saying you have to be in a conference to be in the postseason.
Right.
Or you have to be a conference champion to make the postseason. Okay, well, Notre Dame can never be in the postseason again. The second one is, the first one is your schedule is such that you're building it around AAC teams and MAC teams and all this stuff. which is kind of what the danger was during the COVID year. It's like, well, we said Notre Dame's going to have games to play.
Right.
It's just, is it going to be like is it going to look like BYU schedule, or is it going to look like the one that they had? So that's why they joined the ACC for a year. And that's what it boils down to is if they can't put together a legitimate 12-game schedule that allows them, if they run the table or go 11-1, they can be a playoff team, then that forces their hand. And that would have to come from the conferences making decisions to not be able to play teams that aren't in their league or whatever. That's not where we are right now. That's not where this is right now. The second one, for at least 3-4 more years, there is no rule that's in place that you can't be. What's it? 2025 is when the current playoff system expires.
Yep.
So for the next 4 seasons, 22, 23, 24, 25, there's no rush for Notre Dame to jump in now, right?
Yeah.
And so you don't have to make a decision now. To me, the third one is to me the bigger deal for me.
Yeah.
The network.
Yeah.
And that is why the next couple years are huge for Notre Dame.
Absolutely.
And we talked about this a little bit yesterday, Sean. Marcus Freeman had even though he has no control over negotiations and all that kind of stuff, Marcus Freeman and his coaching staff have an opportunity to I'm booting this person out of here. I'm sorry. You gotta go. If you're going to come in as an outsider and join the chat, at least have a clue what you're talking about. And then don't say a million stupid things in a row, because I don't have time for that stuff. So, Sean, it gets back to this, right? If Notre Dame can put a championship product on the field the next 2 years, then the conversation, and this is why I think Notre Dame needs to stand firm for now. There may come a time. Look, you and I are realists. If we let, what have we been talking about a lot? What we think, what we would do, how we wish it would be.
Right.
Now let's talk reality.
Okay.
This is the first time in my life that I have said there may be a chance that Notre Dame is forced into a conference.
Yeah.
But it's not now.
No.
Because there is going to be playoffs for the next 4 years. There is a path to a championship. There's a schedule locked in, and for those teams to get out of that schedule, they're going to have to pay Notre Dame a lot of money, right, to get out of that. They're going to be fined for at least the next 4 seasons, 22, 23, 24, and 25. If Notre Dame wins a championship under Marcus Freeman the next 2 years, that to me right there is going to guarantee Notre Dame's independence. Because now the Big 12, the Fox Sports and or ESPN, hopefully Fox Sports is going to say there is value to keeping Notre Dame independent. We see here's the problem. A lot of these people don't value what Notre Dame brings as an independent.
Yeah.
And if you're truly a smart business person, you're going to understand, no, we want Notre Dame as part of the Big 10, but they can stay independent in football. Because they can be the foil, they can be the heel or the face, depending on what side of this you're talking to. But once they become just another conference team, that is gone, right? And now they're Penn State, right? Now they're Nebraska. And that's the reality of it. Because the tradition of Ohio State was built in the Big 10. The tradition of Michigan was built in the Big 10. All the tradition that made Nebraska died when it left the Big 12. All the tradition that Penn State had died when it went to the Big 10, because what was the big rival that Penn State had in the Big 10? They didn't have one. Their rivals were Big East and independent teams, Miami, Syracuse, Notre Dame, teams like that. They just became just another team. So if Notre Dame is able to win, Sean, I believe now all of a sudden Fox is going to be more willing to say we're going to throw $40, $50 million in Notre Dame, be part of this big thing we're building, but we're going to let you be part of it as independent, because there's value to that, because other teams may choose independence if they know that they can stay as part of this TV deal.
Yeah.
You see what I'm saying?
Yeah.
And so that to me is where if Notre Dame can win a championship the next 2 years, I'm not talking about playing it, I'm talking about win it.
Yeah.
I think that that ensures that they will have the leveraging power to remain an independent. What are your thoughts on that, Sean?
I think it's spot on. And another thing, we have to look at the possibilities, right? 25 after the 25 season is when the playoff expansion conversation gets heated.
Right.
The NBC contract is up in 24. The SEC's contract with CBS is up after the 23 season. So right in there, where we're pretty much saying Notre Dame has to go ahead and plant their flag at the top of the college football hill, is where all of these major decisions are going to come to a crossroads. NBC has been looking, and I saw someone say that NBC doesn't pay Notre Dame enough. I mean, look, as time goes on,
sure,
of course, a contract isn't worth. Ask Scottie Pippen.
Right.
Great contract when he signed it. 5 years later, vastly underpaid.
Right.
Think about this. How many years did NBC pay for Notre Dame football when it wasn't good?
Right.
So
and they weren't making their money off of it.
They weren't making their money.
Right.
So things kind of balance out. So for Notre Dame fans feel like we should be getting paid more. Yeah, it's kind of evening out right about now with the run Notre Dame has been on recently. ESPN paid $300 million for the SEC. Right? The current contract for CBS is right around $55 million. That was the SEC. I understand.
This is for one game a week.
Yes. And I understand why the SEC looked at that and said, you know what, we can get more than that.
Right.
With the way the SEC dominates now, sure, they got the $300 million. Even right now, I believe that Notre Dame could actually enter into conversations with CBS and what they're paying right now to the conference that is the SEC for one game. I believe they would give it to Notre Dame.
Yes.
To be the anchor of their total college football package that extends to CBS Sports.
Right.
Right? Which is the MAC, the AAC, Mountain West, and I forget the other two conferences.
Right.
And now Notre Dame is the anchor, the main thing for their total package of college football. That is something they could do. I think the relationship between NBC and Notre Dame,
I'm ready for it to die.
Yes, because we both agree that the package could be better in certain ways.
They just don't care. I mean, they just don't care.
We want Notre Dame to take more control.
Right.
Over the production and what goes out, not just on game day, but even during the week. I don't care if you put it on Peacock. I'm chiming in. I'm watching as a Notre Dame fan to see what's going on with the team, the coaches, and the program leading up to a game each and every week.
Right.
So those are the options right there that are obvious. And I think patience is something that's going. It's normally on the side of Notre Dame. It always has been.
Right.
But I'll say this. I think the driving force of the independents is Notre Dame as the university. I really believe that. Because I don't think Notre Dame wants to be I don't think they want to be called a great Big Ten academic university.
I hope not.
No.
That's where people miss the boat on the whole. They have a lot in common. Notre Dame has nothing but geography in common with the Big Ten. Nothing.
Yes, that's it.
Nothing.
That's it.
Other than geography.
Yeah.
There's one private school in the Big Ten?
Yeah.
Right. It's Northwestern. Northwestern's a private school, correct?
Yeah.
Every other school, I believe, is a state college, right?
State college. Yeah.
Much bigger. I mean, it's a different animal. There's a lot of private schools in the ACC, and a lot of the public schools in the ACC are more private in how they go about their business. Like Virginia, for example, that's a public school, but it is treated. They run like a private school in regards to the academic admissions, the size of the school, all that kind of stuff. It's a different animal.
Yes.
And this is something that I think we have a guy named Archer who's a Ohio State fan who's really a good contributor, but this is what non-Notre Dame people don't understand. He says, I think Notre Dame could wait too long and find themselves without leverage. If the Big Ten and SEC take control of the playoff, Notre Dame ends up having to ask its way in instead of being asked in. This is where I think people miss the boat on that. There's no. We saw this. Like, if you didn't learn during the COVID year, then you're not going to learn now. People are like, well, these teams should tell Notre Dame to kick sand. Why? Notre Dame is always going. There's nothing in it for you to neuter Notre Dame before you bring them in. You don't want Notre Dame begging to, like, if you're the Big Ten and the SEC and you really have smart business people, they're going to say, let's bring Notre Dame in now as an independent, let them stay, and then let them get real fat and happy. And then the next time we got a TV deal to discuss, we're going to be like, hey, look, you need to do this. I mean, it would be stupid of them to force a conference vote onto Notre Dame now, just financially.
Right.
Plus, again, right now, since Notre Dame is really good, Notre Dame has all the leverage right now because they are. I mean, look at it like this. People say, well, you should just take but it's like, you should just take Washington, Oregon now. Why? See, y'all don't understand. This isn't about the quality of the program. This is about money.
Yes.
And there's two types of ways to generate money for a TV deal. It's be part of a big TV market. Notre Dame is sort of that. Chicago. But the Big Ten doesn't need Notre Dame for the Chicago market. The other way is you are such a brand that you understand that getting this team impacts 15 different markets.
Yes.
And that's what Notre Dame brings to the table that nobody else brings to the table. Like if you look at the Ohio State when they play a big game and you look at the TV breakdown, Ohio State will get fans from all over the country that will watch the game. Ohio State has fans all over the country. But there's a difference between fans and then power all over the country. And that's what people don't understand about Notre Dame is this isn't just about football. The reason we're talking about football is when Notre Dame is good, that's when they especially get to wield a big stick. Sean, Notre Dame was wielding a big stick when they sucked. And that's the thing is when they're good, they really become a power broker. Why is Jack Swarbrick on the playoff football committee? Not the committee, but like the playoff expansion committee. Why is Jack Swarbrick invited to every decision-making deal that's made with college football? Is it because of him? No, because whoever the AD was, if they knew how to leverage their position, would be the same thing. When you played EA Sports growing up, and you got to that intro thing where it's loading, did you see an Ohio State logo on there?
No.
Did you see a Michigan logo, a USC logo, Texas? No. You know what you saw?
No.
You saw the NCAA logo and Notre Dame's logo.
Absolutely.
That's what you saw. Right? And that's why Notre Dame can be independent. Because here's the dirty little secret of college sports. And you have to understand this. The reason teams hate Notre Dame in large part is because they can't be Notre Dame.
Yes.
Texas tried it and failed miserably with the Longhorn Network. Notre Dame is the only brand that can exist in this TV world on its own. And they hate that. And they want a piece of that. And that's what you have to understand. Do you honestly think that if Alabama could exist on its own, in its own TV deal, do you think for a second that they would say, no, we love the tradition of the SEC? We're going to turn down a $100 million deal to have our own network because we want to stay we're loyal to the SEC.
Right.
No. Do you think Penn State joined the Big Ten because they just thought this is going to be really good for our sports programs? No, they could not exist as an independent anymore on their own.
Miami, Florida State,
right?
They couldn't.
Right. And that's what this boils down to. And that's why Notre Dame does that. And the reality is you're seeing it now with the Michigan guy in the chat. You don't understand who Notre Dame is. And if you're an outsider, I understand why. I get it.
You do realize they've been saying this for almost 20 years, though, right?
Longer than that. Yeah. Remember when Notre Dame turned down the Big Ten in the 90s and was like, oh, you guys are going to regret this. You're going to regret this.
By 2000, Notre Dame's going to be in trouble.
Yeah.
By 2010, Notre Dame's going to be in trouble.
Despite the fact Notre Dame's sucking for 20 years.
Absolutely.
NBC kept re-signing them. You're telling me now that Notre Dame is good, that they don't have leverage? You don't know, and this is what people, and this is not a shot at Antoine or Archer. I love them. They are great members of our chat, right? And we welcome teams. But what we're saying is Stop looking at this as an outsider for a second of another team and look at this from a business standpoint and ask yourself, how has Notre Dame been able to survive this long with a TV deal that doesn't pay them as close to what other teams are making, and then they've sucked for so long? How have they been able to do that? You have to ask yourself that. And once you get the answer to that, then you'll understand where this is coming from.
Let's go ahead and play into some of the things they're saying in the chat. Let's say Notre Dame waits too long.
Right.
Right?
Right.
Guess what happens, Brian?
They get Notre Dame on the cheap.
But it's still a bidding war.
Right.
Because they both still want Notre Dame,
Yes.
because Notre Dame is the crown jewel.
Right.
That everybody knows they both want.
Why would if they decide, so like here what would waiting too long mean? They pass a rule saying you can't get in unless you're, why would they pass that rule? What is that rule geared towards? Is it we got to make sure that Boise State can't get in the playoff? Why would that rule be created?
To get Notre Dame.
It's all about Notre Dame.
Yes.
It's to say we're going to force you to make a pick. But here's the thing. Then Notre Dame's like, we have to join a conference now. Well, guess what? I have two options. There you go. Thank you. And then Notre Dame has their leverage back.
A bidding war for the McLaren F1 of college football, the brand that never depreciates.
Right.
Regardless of what the record is, the brand always wants to be put on TV by the media moguls.
Right.
Why? Because they are the highest rated games.
Yes.
ESPN, 2 of the 5 highest rated games for ESPN this year will be Notre Dame.
Right. Notre Dame will always have leverage. That's what you don't understand. The only time they will lose leverage is if one singular entity exists and it's either you're with us or you're against us.
Yes.
But as long as there's multiple TV networks and multiple conferences, there will always be leverage.
Yeah.
Now, Notre Dame's leverage is we have to join. Notre Dame may someday lose the leverage to be independent. That may be gone someday. But they will still have leverage. It's just now they're going to use it in a different way.
Yeah.
So they will never be left standing in the cold. They just won't, especially if they're still good.
And there are too many smart people to allow Notre Dame to be put in that position.
Right.
They will anticipate what's coming.
Right.
Like they've been doing.
Right. The only mistake Notre Dame could do is panicking.
Yeah.
That's the only mistake they can make. Because once you join a conference, your brand will never be the same.
No.
And I have to hope. Look, Jack Swarbrick has done a lot of big things in his tenure as Notre Dame's athletic director. Some of them I don't like. Those are more Notre Dame related. But when it comes to Notre Dame and the national market, he's done a lot of really good things.
Yeah.
He's not a dumb guy. He's a really smart guy. He has to know that right now. I mean, if you're Notre Dame, you almost want people thinking that you're almost ready. Because here's what happens. If Notre Dame starts hinting that, you know what, we're close, but I'm just not sure. You know what those teams start to do? They start bending over backwards to do whatever's going to make Notre Dame happy. Hey, we'll let you stay independent, and we'll sign a deal with you, and we'll play 3 games a year, and we'll do all this kind of stuff.
Yeah.
If we think because that's what they did to the ACC.
Yes.
They teased the ACC to make you think they actually thought that they're going to join your football league.
Control the narrative. Yeah.
Yes. And so then that they used that to let the ACC do whatever. And then that allows the ACC to beg Notre Dame to join their conference in 2020. And then look what happened. Look at the ACC's financial boon during a COVID year when everybody else was struggling. Why? Because Notre Dame. Yeah. There was that article about that. Like they were actually able to make more money during the COVID year than they did. I think the previous year pre-COVID? Yeah. Why? They had fewer games. Why? Because Notre Dame. So that's what you all have to understand. This isn't arrogance. To me, I don't care. Like to me, I hate talking about this stuff. I want to talk about the O-line Ohio State line matchup, and I don't care about this. This doesn't give me pride in Notre Dame because I don't give a crap about that. I wish we weren't having this conversation.
Yeah, but
this is also reality, right? And again, you have to. You're not listening. The ACC is not the Big Ten of the SEC. The TV contracts prove that. You're missing the point. And this is why Notre Dame is hated. And it's people don't understand this. Like, if you don't get this, why is the Big Ten why is the Big Ten telling Washington and Oregon and other teams, we're going to hold off for now. We want to see what Notre Dame's. Why? What is Notre Dame? Why? And do you think that's going to go away in 2 years or 3 years because they got Washington? And like, do you think they're going to go get Washington and Oregon and then be like, sorry, Notre Dame, you don't have a spot here.
No.
You're lying to yourself if you think that. And that's the thing, is Notre Dame is always holding the power until the moment comes when there's one entity that wields everything. And that's not going to happen. As long as, in that, at least not in my lifetime, that's if there's only one TV network that exists. There's only one this exists. There's only one that this exists. That's when Notre Dame loses their power. But the two mega conferences, Sean, do not mean Notre Dame loses their leverage. It means their leverage is now going in a different direction, but they still have all the they're not. There's this notion that they're going to be left standing at the altar or out in the cold is nonsense. And the reality is, you have to understand that. You have that. Why do these schools want Notre Dame so bad? Because here's what's funny. These people tell me Notre Dame sucks. They're not that big of a brand. Archer's not saying that, but a lot of people, they're not that big of a brand. They don't matter. Look, they haven't won a championships and such because you're too dumb to realize that has nothing to do with what we're talking about.
No.
And then they're like, but we want Notre Dame needs to join a conference. Okay, what conference they join? They should join ours. Why? Why do you care about Notre Dame joining your conference?
Right.
Why do you want Notre Dame to join your conference? If they don't matter, if they don't why do you want them? Why do you want them?
Yeah.
So, I mean, that's the thing that frustrates me is
this is something else that in talking to Brady Quinn, he said this, and immediately I said, wow. He said Notre Dame could actually go speak to Fox independently.
Yes.
Right now.
And
say, look, give us the 3:30 slot.
Yeah. And one night game a year.
A one night game a year. And you can have us. And Fox would say,
Sean,
if that's the way we get you, because Fox doesn't care about conferences.
Can I tell you something else too, Sean? Here's what Fox would do. Here's what it would do. If Notre Dame went to Fox and said, hey, we want to be with you. Here's what we asked for, blah, 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 blah. Fox would say, here's a blank piece of paper. You tell us how much you want. Because here's the thing. Notre Dame doesn't need the same amount of money that the Big Ten schools are getting.
Yeah.
If they're paying them 70 each, Notre Dame say, give us 45, give us 50, and we're good to go.
Yeah.
Right? And here's what we're asking for. 3:30 slot, one 7:30 game a year of our choosing. Right? And Fox would jump at that. And I can say you with confidence, Sean, I'd be willing to say that those conversations have already kind of, in some capacity,
kind of taken place.
Yeah. Not directly, but I'm going to tell someone that knows someone that knows someone that knows someone that,
Yeah.
I think we'd be interested in this.
My only other request would be we need Gus and Joe Klatt on the call.
I mean, that'd be phenomenal. Yes.
For the games. Yes.
Yeah. At least an X number of them.
At least an X number of them. Yes.
Yeah. We'll take $5 million less a year
to get those.
Yeah.
But see, this is what we're talking about. Like, for everyone else, they get the sense that this is a moment of desperation for Notre Dame. And Notre Dame doesn't have to make a decision for like 4 years.
Yeah.
Like, it's more desperation for the two media moguls that are fighting.
Yeah.
And the conferences that are trying to beat each other.
Mm-hmm.
They're the ones in competition. Notre Dame's at the eye of the storm. The last I checked, they said that's the most peaceful place.
Right.
So while everybody else wants to talk about what Notre Dame needs to do, Notre Dame is at the most peaceful place in this entire thing.
Right. That's why there's like, I know Notre Dame fans are panicking right now, but the only thing that should make you concerned is that Notre Dame would panic.
Yeah.
That's the only thing is the minute that Notre Dame says, you know what, we see the writing on the wall, we're going to join now, is the minute that they made the wrong choice, in my opinion.
Yeah.
The only conference decision that I would support right now is if Notre Dame was going to start their own or decide they were going to create something, whether it was with the ACC, whether it was a partnership with the ACC or the other leagues, to say we're going to create our own entity in competition of them. Hey, CBS, you want to get in a college game? Here's how you do it. This is what the big boys are spending. Are you willing to spend that for the ACC and the Big 12 and the Pac-12 and this thing that we're going to lead this alliance? And not in the way that the Big 10 led the alliance of we're trying to bring you in so we can rob you, invite you into my home with the thought of we're going to make you a nice dinner only to tie you up and rob you of all your belongings. That's what the Big 10 did to the Pac-12.
Yeah.
That's what they did.
Yeah.
And people want to be a part of that.
Yeah.
People want to join that. Screw that.
And can we be honest about something else?
Of course.
There is a measure of happiness that exists in this thing as well. You want to be honest? Alabama's not happy that they have to split the equal pie with Vanderbilt. Michigan and Ohio State are not happy that they get the same cut as Rutgers. They're not.
Mm-hmm.
They're like, you stink.
Right.
We carry the bell for this conference. Yep. Why are we splitting everything equal with you? I don't care how much it is. They're not happy.
Right.
You know who's happy with whatever they get? Notre Dame, because they don't have to share it with anyone.
Right.
Because the TV money is not only money that goes into the bank, the TV money gives them the ability to generate money.
Right.
So let's go back to 2012.
That's what people don't understand, Sean.
2012, I read an article where NBC gave them $15 million, and from the $15 million, they generated $36 million of revenue.
Right.
People don't understand the economics. They just look at one number. So like I said, a contract that's 10 years old, the $55 million that CBS was giving Notre Dame, you could give Notre Dame that today, CBS. I think Notre Dame will get more, and it's worth more right now in this economy. But if you gave them that 55 would generate probably close to 85 to 90 million.
Right.
So yes, for those in the chat say it's simple mathematics, it is.
Right. You're just looking at the wrong formula.
They don't share with anyone, and that's a happy place.
Right.
You go ask the Alabama and Georgia ADs how they feel about Vanderbilt getting that check.
Right.
All for their sweat.
Which is why they're trying to kill the NCAA.
Yes.
Because they're not only splitting money with Vanderbilt, they know that they're having to split money right now with the Sun Belt, the AAC, all the teams that those other conferences that the SEC that the ESPN is paying. Yep. They want that money not going to those teams and going to them.
Yep. That's
the reality of it. That's what people don't understand, Sean. And I think a lot of Notre Dame fans get this, but this is why what frustrates me is if you're an outsider looking in, perhaps people that have studied this is our livelihoods are to understand these things.
Yeah.
Maybe we might have some insight into this that you don't have as someone who's not a fan or follower of the team. Just at least be open-minded enough to stop talking for just 5 minutes and hear what we're saying, and then maybe go do a little research on it. You know what I mean? Because you have to keep asking yourself, why do these conferences want? If Notre Dame's not a big deal, why does these teams want them? Why does Notre Dame have to join a conference? Why has Notre Dame been able to survive why are they the last independent standing? Really
struggling.
The Independence League really died. What was it, like early 90s? Because Miami, Penn State.
Once Miami went to the Big East.
It was Miami. It was like 92,
Miami,
93. State, Virginia Tech, Miami,
Tech,
West Virginia, all those teams left for the Big East. Penn State kind of started it when they went to the Big Ten.
Big Ten, yeah.
And then Florida State went to the ACC around the – well, actually, I think Florida State might have – and Miami might have started it. Yeah, because Florida State went to the ACC.
Yeah.
Let me just look that up real quick because Florida State Miami, I actually think, beat Penn State to the on that one. Let me just look here real quick, Sean, because Florida State went to the ACC in 92. And was that the same time that Penn State went? I'm trying to look this up real quick. Somebody might be able.
Penn State was in the Big Ten early 90s.
I think their first year was 93. Just let me look that up. Their first year in the Big Ten was 93.
That was
Florida State's right.
Yeah.
Florida State's first year in the Big Ten or in the ACC was 92.
Yeah.
So Florida State beat them, and I'm going to look up and see when Miami went to the Big East, because all those dominoes were kind of it was Miami. Miami went to the Big East in 91. That is the domino that started it. And then a year later, Florida State went to the ACC, and then a year later, Bama went to the and that's also around the time that the Southwest Conference blew up.
Yeah, because
like Arkansas left and all that kind of stuff. So that early 90s is when all that happened. And do you remember what the mantra was back then?
That's why that last game at home against Miami, when they finally beat them in that last matchup at Notre Dame Stadium, that's why the rivalry ended. Because
part of it. Yeah. So here's my thing, Sean. You could go back and read articles back then, and when because this all built over years, and it was after the court case that allowed conferences to kind of negotiate money. Why didn't Florida State, who at that time was Miami was an even better program than Notre Dame was then. Now, Notre Dame and Miami were they were it from 88 to 91 when this all was going down. Notre Dame and Miami were the powerhouses. Right? Why did Miami join the Big East? Why did Florida State, who'd been a top 5 team for how many years in a row and then would go on to why did they join the ACC? And why did Penn State join the Big Ten? And Notre Dame did what? Well, we're going to sign with NBC. Why didn't Florida State sign with the league by themselves?
Yeah.
Why didn't Penn State sign with somebody by themselves? Because they've never had the ability to survive. And once the TV money became a thing, and that was late 80s, early 90s, there was only one entity that could have survived on itself. That's not my opinion.
Yeah.
That's not me that's just a fact. Why didn't another network, wouldn't it have been cheaper for CBS or whoever else to just sign Penn State as opposed to the SEC?
Yeah. But who was the independent TV maven that jumped out there and everybody was skeptical? It was Notre Dame.
Right. And here's the thing. Notre Dame was only good for two years during that stretch.
Yeah.
And then they were good because Notre Dame's TV deal was 91 or 92?
Yeah.
And after that, I think it was 92 was the first year, right? Does somebody in the chat remember was the first year of the NBC deal? Was it 91 or 92? They had it before 93. And I think it was 92. But 91. Somebody said 91. So they were good for 3 years and then fell off a cliff.
Yeah.
By 94, Notre Dame was 6-5-1, and their best year after that for 20 years was 9-3.
Yeah.
And that's the reality people have to understand is yet they maintained the NBC has since re-signed Notre Dame in the midst of Notre Dame sucking at least twice. Correct?
Yeah.
NBC would want to keep Notre Dame again. It's more about, does Notre Dame want NBC? That's the bigger question for me. In a perfect world, Sean, if I was football king, here's what I would do, right? I would have Notre Dame do one of two things. Sign with Fox as an independent. I'd be totally fine with that. Or use your leverage, get CBS and all that kind of stuff to say, hey, we want to get in this mix. We want to be the third player in this. And we're going to be the saviors of the ACC, but we need Notre Dame to be it, whatever the case may be. One of those two things. So I would have Notre Dame leave him. Point is, I'd have Notre Dame leave the NBC.
Yeah.
If NBC was smart, because NBC doesn't have the money they're just not in a position to get into the bidding war with Fox and ESPN. They're just not. I don't think CBS does. Fox is different. Fox is a different animal than NBC and CBS, right? Fox Sports is. What I think those leagues should do, what I would love to see NBC do, is just double down on the only other football entity that they have. And you and I talked about this last night, Sean, and I'd like for you to kind of explain that. I'd like to see Notre Dame leave NBC, go to Fox or CBS. And then I'd like to see CBS, ESPN do something different, which I think would be the thing that maybe could save the smaller levels, which is, well, we'll just dive into that.
We don't have a collective, which includes the conferences that will be left out. We could possibly have an HBCU package.
That's the one we were talking about last night.
Yeah.
Because I don't think NBC is big enough to get into all the leagues.
No.
Right? But I think they could start something with the HBCUs that would be pretty cool.
Yeah.
They could then split up what they're paying Notre Dame or even less.
Yeah.
And then maybe CBS and some of these other entities start to say, well, hey, we're going to sign a smaller deal with just this league.
Mm-hmm.
You know, we'll sign the Sun Belt, you know, some small entity. We'll bring these conferences on. They're not going to make as much as we would in that. And then those schools can still survive.
And to point out, there's something else we didn't mention that makes sense as far as CBS. CBS is very much invested in not only college football, but high school recruiting.
Mm-hmm.
Like they fund certain publications.
Right.
Right. So now, which is funny because we always talk about how Notre Dame kids always seem to drop when they commit to Notre Dame. If they had a contract with CBS, it would be very interesting to see how the rankings would go then as far as Notre Dame commits and where they were ranked nationally.
Mm-hmm.
It would be very interesting because publications connected to CBS were always tied into the SEC.
Right.
So that's just another way of looking at it. But what you're talking about with the HBCUs and that package coming together, because they are ascending in attention.
Right.
And you can see the trend. And you can see the trend of the young recruits paying more attention to them. So that would be something to take advantage of in the short term and maybe do a shorter deal to see how things go. So yeah, that would be a great idea.
Unless Notre Dame wanted to wield their power with the NBC and say, hey, we will only stay with you if we get X amount of dollars and you got to sign an HBCU contract.
Yeah.
You got to carry one prime time. Because this is the thing, Notre Dame wants to play in the afternoon.
They want to, yeah. And
so
big games at night, yeah.
You know, something like that. So I think that'd be something like that. But I at the end of the day, I'd still like to see Notre Dame leave NBC.
Yeah.
I'm tired of the disrespect they show Notre Dame.
Yeah.
With just the lack of attention they showed Notre Dame. And I just don't think NBC is a well-run organization.
Well, we said it yesterday. They treat the Notre Dame brand and game day like a minor league for the NFL packages. They basically start people out there, let them cut their chops, and then they move them up to the NFL. So, you know, there is no continuity in the game day, and it's hard to enjoy for the fans, in my opinion. So I saw someone talk about Notre Dame endowment. According to U.S. News, Notre Dame ranks 8th in the nation in endowments. And that's according to U.S. News in November of 2021.
People have to understand too, though, Sean, and you know this, you can't just take money out of your endowment to spend on your football program. It doesn't work like that. That's not how endowments work. But here's the thing, though. But when Notre Dame says we need $500 million, $300 million to build stadium upgrades, they raise it in a short period of time.
Yeah.
We need $200 million to build a new indoor facility. They raise it in record time. I mean, no problem at all. We need to go and raise money to make sure that we can keep our football coach. That's the thing is like that's where Notre Dame's power comes from. Is when they say we need something and there's a worthy investment in it, then there's plenty of money out there in the Notre Dame universe to do it. And that's the power of Notre Dame. That's the reality of this that people don't quite understand.
Yeah.
And so, you know, killing me right now, just a lack of understanding how this whole thing works.
You know, and of course, NBC could get somebody in there with vision and not, you know.
It's a first for everything.
Yes. You never know what can happen over the next few years.
Right. But that's why Notre Dame doesn't, at the end of the day, that's why Notre Dame doesn't need to rush in anything.
No.
But I think it's smart for Notre Dame to make people think they're at least willing to listen.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think it helped. I think there's two mistakes Notre Dame could do, in my opinion, Sean. You tell me what you think of this. The first mistake is to panic and join a conference.
Yeah.
Like that would be a mistake. The other is to belligerently reject the notion of ever joining a conference. Yeah. Because then there's like, well, why do we need to cater to Notre Dame? They've told us they're not going to come be with us. So screw them. You know, not that would have a big impact because they couldn't force it, but then all of a sudden you've created an enemy where one doesn't need to exist.
Which leads you to believe that the conversation that has been ongoing for over 20 years has really kind of been guided by Notre Dame.
Right.
Like you would think the media
directly or indirectly.
Yeah, is leading the narrative, and it's like, like we're keeping the buzz out there because it only helps and aids.
Mm-hmm.
So
right. Because at the end, like we just said, so the timeline is Notre Dame signed with NBC first.
Yeah.
Nobody signed Miami to an individual deal. Nobody signed Florida State to an individual deal. Do you think those schools would have been amenable to that? Of course they would have been.
Yeah.
And the same thing that's true now is the same that's true then.
Yeah. And
that is that Notre Dame is a different animal. They just are. You don't have to like it, but it's just true. Otherwise, why are fans of other teams in a chat about Notre Dame caring about what Notre Dame does?
They want to know.
Because they know that Notre Dame's different. And that's the reality of it. Notre Dame's going to be fine as long as Notre Dame doesn't do something stupid.
Yeah.
That's the reality of it.
Yeah.
And the stupid is the two things I think we just talked about, right? So anyway, Sean, that's gonna do it for those topics. I do want to get to some questions here because we did have some super chats, which I really, really, really appreciate. Maltavius with a super chat. You look what his son's rocking. This was, I think, at the Cincinnati game. Look at the hat his son's rocking. Love it. Got that IB hat going. Thank you for that very much. Happy 4th of July, gentlemen. How much momentum does the Big Ten actually have here with Notre Dame? It seems like it's getting hot and heavy, but I feel Notre Dame will ultimately stand firm. I think, John, that's kind of what we were talking about. I don't think the Big Ten has the leverage over Notre Dame that a lot of people, fans think, because we've been here before. This was the same stuff that we were told in the 90s.
Yeah.
It's the same stuff we were told in 2000. Like in 2011, people were saying, boy, Notre Dame needs to jump on board. They're going to get left behind. And you know what happened? Notre Dame's AD, it crushed the Megaton conference stuff.
Yeah.
He started making moves and he crushed it, right? The reason it's happening now is because I don't think he wants to stop it now. And I had somebody tell me this. I'm like, it wouldn't shock me if Jack Swarbrick knows that this is the end of the NCAA and is okay with it because the NCAA has proven to be useless. It is now basically a drain. Let's stop. There's too much money going to them that's getting wasted. Let's figure something else out.
Yeah.
You know? So, you know, we've heard this a million times. Sean, you and I are older. We've heard this a million times. Oh, this is the thing that's going to force Notre Dame into being in a conference. Okay. Yep. Notre Dame's not joining the conference till it wants to. So I don't think that the Big Ten has any leverage, and Richard doesn't say this, is momentum. It's not going to be momentum that causes Notre Dame to join. It's going to be because they just feel like it's time, or they have been able to work out a deal that works. Look, Notre Dame's not going to join the Big Ten to become an equal partner. It's not.
No.
Not right now. You know, it's just not going to happen, in my opinion. So, and I hope they never join the Big Ten, but that's a different conversation for a different day. James Lawrence Zenzi says we have to land Justin Scott, and that was from our conversation earlier. And Sean, that is
I'll step out on a limb and say I believe that will be a mid-fall possibility.
Mm-hmm. There you go.
There you go.
The guy from Chicago would know more than me. Matt Anderson, any recruitings out there have any thoughts on how many guys Notre Dame might take in 23? I looked all the way back to 2010, and except for 2 years, they took between like 22 and 27 guys. They're at 17 now. They'll be 25 to 27 is really 24 to 27, depending on quarterback, is kind of really the range. I think they'll get a quarterback and they'll get to 25. And then if they're good enough this season, there may be some guys they try to go out and flip. But Notre Dame's the standpoint of if they can get the right guys, they'll go to 27, but they don't need to go to 27. This is what I think people have to understand. There's not a need to go to 27. They will get there if the right guys want to come, right? Yeah. But I think 24 to 27 is the range that we'll see this year, Sean. Any thoughts on that?
Yeah, and we were locked in at 25 for a long time, right?
I still think they are.
Yeah. And then we said, oh, well, there were certain times we felt like it could bump up to 26.
Right.
Heck, they're going to the season more than likely.
They're going to have, in my opinion, at least 20. At least 20 going into the season. 20? It wouldn't shock me if they get to 22 by the time the season starts. Public commitments we're talking about.
Yeah, public commitments. So, yeah, I'm going to stay with that 25 when all things are said and done. Of course, 27, we're talking about Notre Dame getting absolutely everybody going that takes their recruitment into the fall. And that's wishful thinking. I don't think it happens. But 25, I think, is what they end up with in this class.
Next question here is super chat. Charlie Weiss brought this up. He's really upset with you, Sean. He said he said this in the chat last night, but he's given a super chat tonight, so I'm going to have to read it. What's up, IB? Sean won't lie. I was really hoping you would read my super chat yesterday to Brady Quinn. I think he would have got a kick out of my name.
You know what? I think I remember it, but he was on a schedule and he tapped in late. So we had to get him out. And we just didn't have time to go into, those questions that you guys posted. It was all about time.
Yeah, when Brady Quinn's on the show, you got a small window of time.
And he lets you know that you have a small window. He lets you know.
Yes. Sorry about that. Just StreamYard decided they didn't want to work with me anymore for a couple minutes. Ed says, if we had to join a super conference, I'd prefer to join an ACC-SEC alignment, then the Big Ten, then try to keep USC and Navy as non-conference games. Simply put, the recruiting is too strong down south. Yeah.
We forgot to mention that as well.
Yeah.
The connection between Army-Navy with the CBS affiliation.
Mm-hmm.
That's another thing that we're working.
Yeah, you brought that up last night.
Yeah, that's another
Sean,
thing.
this will there's nothing in it for Notre Dame to join the Big Ten other than money. There's no recruiting advantage. Yeah. There's not like institutions in the Big Ten.
Yeah.
They're public schools that are giants and research oriented. You know what I mean? Like, that's not Notre Dame. There's far more ACC schools that are similar to Notre Dame than there are in the Big Ten. And that's not to say the Big Ten don't have good schools. They're just different kind of schools. That's the point. And Notre Dame wants to be with like-minded schools, not a bunch of giant research state schools that are research facilities.
Yeah.
That's just and what's the recruiting advance for being the Big Ten? Hey, you get to come play games in the Midwest now on road games. Gee, thanks. It's wonderful. Whatever. Go Deep says, I'm as pro-independent guy as there is, but it is time to join the Big Ten and get ahead of all the conference movement while we still have all the power. It's just a matter of time until we are forced. This is what we talked about too, Sean. There's two false premises in this comment. Number one is that they have the power now and need to wield it. In reality, that would result in them losing their power. Joining the Big Ten would cause them to lose their power. And then number two, the being forced thing. That is, they're not going to be forced to join a conference anytime soon. Mm-hmm. The earliest that could potentially happen is 24. And I say, the stuff runs through 25, but by 24, we'll have an idea of what direction that's going to go.
Yeah.
Right. I mean, that's the reality of it. So there's just, to me, there's two false premises into that I think is behind why a lot of Notre Dame fans are panicking right now.
Yeah.
And, that's not BK PTSD. That's just media beating it into your heads for 30 years that Notre Dame isn't what it was. And to a degree, you've kind of bought it a little bit, Ed says, I honestly think college football is being led off a cliff. This super conference seems like a terrible idea.
It's really not about the game. It's about business.
Yeah.
So
I agree. And that was kind of what we mentioned earlier.
Yeah.
Antoine Johnson, our resident Michigan fan, says, I was talking to some other Notre Dame fans. They seem to think that they can remain independent. But my argument is if the Big Ten and SEC take all the relevant teams, then what? Here's my simple counter to that. If the SEC and the Big Ten consolidate all the teams, does that change the number of teams that are currently in a conference? The answer is no. Whether all those same teams are in 5 conferences or 2, it doesn't change Notre Dame's universe. The only thing that changes Notre Dame's universe is if the way that those conferences are structured does not allow them to play anyone outside of their conference.
Mm-hmm.
That's it. And that's what people have to understand is if there's 48 teams in 2 conferences or 48 teams in 4 conferences, it's still 48 teams that are in a conference. Right? I mean, there's really only one true independent team.
There's really only one thing that can be done to Notre Dame, right? And that's keeping them out of the playoff.
Right.
Because you can't stop Notre Dame from going to find a TV partner.
Right.
You can't.
Right.
Their brand is their brand.
Right.
They can go do what they want to
do
with that. The only thing that can really truly force Notre Dame's hand is the super conferences telling Notre Dame, you can't be a part of our playoff.
Right. Right.
That's it.
Yep. Sean Kane, this is one that this was said during the beginning of the interview, Sean, and I wanted to bring this up because it is kind of a more happier time than what we were talking about for much of this show. Sean Kane says, Brian and Sean, do you guys remember a time that the entire fan base was united for an incoming coach like Freeman? I think even the great Holtz had a couple of doubters coming in. Well, Marcus Freeman has doubters. I mean, you're not in these chats and on message boards. There's some. There's always going to be some. I can't tell you the answer to that, Sean, because I was 8 years old when Lou Holtz was hired. Sean, you were what, 9, 10?
Look, I think it's apples and oranges, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because you have doubters coming off of a very successful predecessor. So the fear is, can he keep it going at that same level? Mm-hmm. Right? It gives you a little bit of consternation. I get it. I understand.
Mm-hmm.
Coming off of Jerry Faust, it was like, dude, Luke, whatever Luke can do for us. Like, he can get us to 84. That first year, when they were competitive and Tim Brown was doing his thing, oh, that was the happiest Notre Dame fans had been.
That was year 2.
Yeah, year 2. I'm sorry. That was the happiest Notre Dame fans have been in a long time. They had no clue what was coming. Right behind that, no clue at all, but it happened. So I think it's apples and oranges because of the situation. I don't think there was a lot of fear or doubt. I would say there's probably more doubt surrounding Marcus Freeman.
Yeah.
Because of who he's replacing and what the culture he's stepping into. With Lou Holtz, it was kind of like, dude, whatever you do is going to be better than what we've been through.
Right.
And he kind of reset the expectations with what he was able to establish. So it's apples to oranges, but I can see someone thinking the way Sean is thinking.
I understand too. The way I look at it too, Sean, is part of the reason I think there actually is more doubters for Marcus Freeman is legitimately. With Lou Holtz, you could look at what he did at Arkansas, at NC State, and even at Minnesota, going from a terrible team to then year 2, getting into a bowl game. So there was like if he can bring that formula to a place like Notre Dame, where he's going to get better players than he had at Arkansas or whatever the case may be, then there's a thought that, he's going to get it turned around. I don't think they thought like title in year 3, maybe. I don't know if they did or didn't, but there was a confidence that Lou Holtz was going to get Notre Dame on the right track.
Right.
And there was a lot of people that wanted Lou Holtz to be the hire when Dan Devine got hired. And this is something I learned from Lou Samoji working with him, is there was a heavy push, including from some in the athletics department, that wanted Lou to be that guy. It was the priests and some of the bigger decision makers, I'm told, that are the ones that wanted Dan Devine, because they wanted to hire Dan Devine like much earlier.
Yeah.
They wanted to hire Dan Devine instead of I think there were some people that I'm going to look this up to make sure that I have this correct. But there were some people at Notre Dame. This is what Lou Samoji told me, right? So so I'm trying to get this correct. But there were people at Notre Dame that wanted Notre Dame to hire Dan Devine instead of Ara Parseghian in '64, because Dan had success at Missouri and Ara was coming off of a year where so like in 1960, Dan Devine led Missouri to an 11-0 record in an Orange Bowl victory. They were 7-2-1, 6-8-1-2, 6-7-3. So like they were finishing in the top 25 every year, where Ara was going 500 at Northwestern. Now he was dominating Notre Dame. I think he was like 4-5-0 against Notre Dame. But this is what Lou said, is there was actually some that wanted Dan Devine instead of Ara Parseghian, which is why when Ara was going to be hired, that it was a no-brainer that the decision makers were going to push for Dan Devine, even though there were some from an athletic standpoint that wanted Lou to be the hire then, which is why Lou had in his that's where the whole contract for Lou came into play. Is like it just never worked out. So like when Jerry Faust got hired, Dan Devine is who was going to replace Ara. There was people that wanted Lou when Jerry Faust was hired. Excuse me, I got it mixed up.
Yeah.
But there were the main decision makers at Notre Dame, the people that didn't necessarily love football, wanted to go with Jerry Faust. So my understanding is there was somebody that was a higher up in athletics that knew Lou, that wanted Lou, that said, make sure that you have it in here that you can come here. So when Lou signed with Minnesota, he knew that Jerry Faust was struggling, which is why he had built into his contract the Notre Dame clause of, if I lead him to a bowl game, you got to let me out of my contract if Notre Dame calls. So it's interesting how that all goes. So the point is, there were people that already thought Lou could win at Notre Dame when he got hired, where right now all of our thoughts, like you and I think Marcus is going to win, but it's 100% speculation based on what he's done in a role that he doesn't currently have. Right. So those are understandable doubts. If that's the concern, hey, he's never done it before. Absolutely. And look at what happened the last time they hired a coach that anybody with head coaching experience. I understand all that. I get that. And that's where I think Lou was. And also when Lou was hired, they were still less than a decade away from their most recent national title.
Yeah.
We're now going on 30 plus.
Man.
And that's the difference, So I would say that I don't know how the fan base was then. I think the fan base wasn't unified then because there weren't as many unifying things like social media, message boards, websites, and things like that. So I don't know if there was as much of that as maybe there is now. But
I would say
I could tell you.
I think I'm interested in hearing what you say about this, and I want to make sure I put this correctly. I would think there's more unity on the campus behind the program right now, possibly than during Lou's tenure.
I couldn't speak to that. I just know I was told what Lou Samogio always told me that there was a everybody was excited when Lou got hired.
Yeah.
And part of it was, and this is where the difference is, Sean, that you were talking about. Part of it was because Jerry Faust, as nice of a man as he supposedly was, and I've had a chance to meet Coach Faust a couple times, and he's a very good man. He's a very nice man in our interactions, and I've heard that that's just kind of just a genuinely good man.
Yeah.
Just way in over his head. And Notre Dame had become an embarrassment. And they weren't just getting blown out by good teams like Miami. They were getting embarrassed. They were losing to Air Force. I mean, it was bad.
It was bad.
And they were a joke. And so it was kind of like, oh, thank God. It's like a breath of fresh air. And so I think that was one of those things where that's why the campus was fired up about Lou and his no nonsense and all that kind of stuff. Whereas with Marcus, it's like everybody's excited on campus about Marcus being there because they were tired of dealing with Kelly and who he was and how he was. But there's a nervousness. I'm being honest.
I didn't do it on purpose.
But there's a nervousness but can Marcus win?
Yes.
That's the question. There wasn't a concern. The question with Lou was when, not would he win. You knew he was going to win. You just didn't know when. I mean, you look what he did at Arkansas and NC State and all that. They knew he was going to win. They just didn't know when.
Yeah.
When he would win. And with Coach Freeman, we don't know if he's going to win at Notre Dame because he's never been a coach.
Yeah.
But I think the excitement for him is partly what he's doing on the recruiting trail, but also partly because you actually have a head coach, and let's just be honest here, that I can actually root for. But in the past, I was rooting for Notre Dame in spite of my feelings of the coach.
Yeah.
Now it's like there's someone you can be proud of because here's why. People knew Lou loved Notre Dame.
Yeah.
They knew it before he was hired. They knew it when he was hired. And he conducted himself as someone who loved Notre Dame.
Absolutely.
People knew that Brian Kelly looked at Notre Dame as just a job. And it was more about what can Notre Dame do for me as opposed to the other way around.
Yeah.
And I think that's something that has been very smart about how Marcus Freeman has conducted himself to the detriment of angering Ohio State people with some of his early comments.
Oh, well.
But they were strategic.
Yeah.
They were not goofs. Because I can say this and then walk it back later, but you know what I mean? But it's out there that those things are true of. He views Notre Dame as special. And then, that's kind of how the other thing goes.
I think Lou had to, in a way, build the morale that had been lessened. To whereas Marcus, I don't think, has to really build. He stepped in on a level that was probably a little bit higher than what Lou stepped in on.
Yeah.
And now,
because as you've said, Sean, the players knew they were good. They felt they were being held back.
Right.
The players that Lou stepped into, I don't think they had that same faith in themselves.
No, they didn't.
So that's another good distinction between the two. Yes. But But the point is that people were excited when Lou was hired, and people were excited when Marcus was hired. Yeah. But I think that there was a lot of people that didn't want Kelly. There was a lot of people that did want Kelly
when he was hired.
But a lot of people that didn't want him is because it was those arrogant fans like, oh, he came from Cincinnati and all, all this other kind of stuff. It was like silly petty stuff.
Yeah.
And there was a small group of people that genuinely despised the way that he walked out on Cincinnati. And those people, I think, have kind of been vindicated because he did the same exact thing in Notre Dame.
Yeah.
It's like a guy who cheats on his wife with another woman and marries her, and then that woman's shocked when he does the same thing to her 10 years later. Yeah. But I think that's where I think even the people that have doubts about Marcus Freeman, what I have yet to encounter, Sean, is someone who actually every person that I've encountered who has voiced concern about Marcus Freeman wants to be wrong. Yeah. Yes. There were Notre Dame fans that wanted to be right about Brian Kelly, even if at the expense of Notre Dame, because they disliked him. And I haven't experienced that yet with Marcus Freeman. And I don't remember that being a thing with Coach Holtz. I think that's another difference too.
Yeah.
I mean, people in the chat that don't think Coach Freeman is going to be successful. Do you want to be wrong? I know a lot of people that did not want to be right about that didn't want to be wrong about Brian Kelly, because then they felt like they'd have to give praise to someone that they thought was not a good person.
Right.
And that's not true of Coach Freeman. All right. Mark E. Stewart, thank you for the super chat, Mark. Appreciate you very, very much. He says, do former and current players feel the same about Notre Dame's independence as the fan base does based on your discussions with them? Especially the older guys.
Yeah.
You know more of the younger guys than I do, Sean. The guys that played for Lou. Yeah.
The younger guys still want the independence as well.
Yeah. Because
they know it's a special place. They know.
You talked, a lot of them, that's why they picked. This is what a lot of fans have done. This is why a lot of kids pick Notre Dame, is because of the fact that they're independent.
I remember, just to back that up, talking about how special it is. It's just the same conversation with Brady Quinn. And remember Emilio Agard, when he visited, had the video where he went downstairs, walked out of the locker room, hit the play like a champion board. Brady, just on cue, was like, I remember when I did that on my recruiting trip. He said, I remember when I did it before my first game. We were playing Washington State, and he goes into the game. He starts talking about the game. It's like immediately everything came back to him. So it's just Notre Dame's such a special place that all of the players definitely would not want to go ahead and lessen what they feel like their memories are about the place.
Sean, can you do me a favor as I'm bringing these next couple up?
Yeah.
So above the Ryan Loftus's super sticker at 350, there's several other super stickers I hadn't starred yet, and super chats I haven't starred yet. When I got booted, those were gone. So I only started it where I came back in.
Okay.
So since I don't have those starred, so as we're kind of going through this, if you just kind of scroll up and find some of those, most of them are just super stickers. If you see a super chat, just put it in there. I'll know which ones we've brought up or not yet. But I want to make sure that those people get their appreciation for giving us a super chat or a super sticker. Here's a question from Peter Wazanski. And Peter says, if Christian Gray, and this is something that was interesting we were talking about last night, Sean, if Christian Gray does run a 4.42 40, imagine the speed the second would have with Bowen and Bell running under 4.4, silly speed. Think about this, Sean. This is something I tweeted out last night. I don't know if you saw this. Notre Dame has 3 kids from Texas. Braylon James runs a 4.47. That is moving for a kid that's about 6'3". Yeah. Moving. He is by far the slowest kid from Texas that's committed to Notre Dame right now. By far. Because Peyton Bowen ran a 4.38 at Notre Dame last summer, and Micah Bell has insane speed. So when you look at the secondary, if Christian Gray does in fact have the speed that he had, because I think it was the Ohio State camp last summer, Sean, he ran like a 4.41 and a 4.42.
Right.
If that's legit speed, think about this. Notre Dame will have 4 commitments. If he commits to Notre Dame, they'll have 4 commitments, and the third fastest guy ran a 4.41 and a 4.42 at a summer camp. The third fastest guy.
That works. That works.
That'll play.
That Mike Mickens is really struggling recruiting.
Yeah, if only he could recruit, man.
If only he could recruit. Darn it.
Alan Kren says, Brian, why can't the rest of the teams left join the independent league? Based on Alan's remaining comments, I think this is a rhetorical question. But this kind of goes back to what we had said earlier. And Alan, if I'm incorrect and this is not a rhetorical question, please let me know and we'll address it further. But I kind of feel like from the remainder of his comments that that's a bit of a rhetorical question. So, that's a great question. Why can't other teams? Do you really think that if there was another team that could make the kind of money, again, not just off TV deals, because the TV deal, which you have to understand for Notre Dame, the TV deal, and this is what non-Notre Dame fans more than anything don't get. The TV deal is just a small part of the pie for Notre Dame, whereas for a lot of other teams, it is the pie.
It is the pie.
And that's what you have to understand. It's just a different animal in this regard. We have a couple more here. Will Claw says, with all of this Big Ten talk, now I really want to beat Ohio State. And thank you for the super chat, Will, very much. Sean, there's a little bit to that, right? Like this notion of like all these Big Ten teams that just kind of yap. And it's just like,
you have your people that say Notre Dame would struggle against a true Big Ten schedule.
Right.
Like, okay. All right.
Right.
You say
right.
so.
ACC team said that too. ACC fans said that too. Y'all are about to see. Okay. Like you're the last conference to be talking that kind of noise.
Right.
Come on now. Let's be serious. Okay. Let's see here. We got this. We had a super sticker from Ryan Loftus. Ryan, thank you very, very much for that. Did you find any of those, Sean?
No, I didn't see any more after that.
Okay. I was talking about before that, before Ryan's at 350. Yeah. Because that's where I was able to kind of come back and
he
see
said
it.
350, and I had to remember I'm an hour behind you. So.
Yeah. Oh, okay. So 250 for you?
Yeah.
Okay. Sorry about that. Ryan, thank you for the super sticker, buddy. I really appreciate that very, very much.
All right. I got another one. Oh, yeah.
Yep. And we have one from Desiree White. Lou Holtz said it best. Thank you, Desiree, for this comment. Brian Kelly never understood what it meant to be a head coach at Notre Dame. He never appreciated the history and nostalgia that is Notre Dame, which is why he could never win big. I think there's a lot to that, Sean.
Did Lou actually say that?
No. Yeah, well, kind of. Yeah. He didn't say it this harshly. He didn't say it this harshly, but he said things about Kelly not appreciating Notre Dame that then could lead you to Desiree's fuller, embracement of it. But yeah, since Kelly left, Lou has said some comments about that because there was not a lot of positive feelings there between the two, and Coach Freeman has embraced Coach Holtz in a way that Brian Kelly never even came close to, and so that's added to it as well. But he kept his mouth shut for 12 years because he loves Notre Dame more than he dislikes how other people may handle their business.
Sounds like most of the players that played under him.
And ones that played, for and under Kelly. Some of the earlier guys under Kelly. Tristram West says, I'm a big Georgia football fan and an outsider, but I always saw Brian Kelly as a con guy with ulterior motives. I don't know why, but Freeman appears to be a genuine guy from my outside view. This is something that I never thought of, Sean. Does Marcus Freeman, if he wins, become a guy that makes Notre Dame more likable, or will they just kind of give him the Dabo Sweeney treatment and start to his charm goes away when he wins? Like, because Clemson was like that lovable loser team until they won. And then now everybody hates Dabo, right? Yeah. He was this fun, excitable guy and all this until he won. And it's like, no, screw Dabo. I don't like this. I don't like that. So does Freeman make Notre Dame more likable? And I think this is a great comment by Tristram. Or if he does then start beating them, right? We're not saying this like arrogantly. I'm just saying like hypothetically, if he then starts beating them, wins titles and all that, do they then kind of say, well, screw that guy, I don't like him? Or does it like, you know what? Like, I respect that. We got to step up our game. I respect that, dude. We got to step up our game. How do you think that goes?
Well, I would hope they approach it the way we do. We respect Nick Saban.
Right.
You know?
Right. I think you and I might have different opinions. I have a lot of respect for Dabo.
Yeah.
I mean, the fact like 7 of his 10 assistant coaches are former players tells you that his players love
I
him.
don't think I have a problem with Dabo as a coach. I think
gotcha.
the things that have come up with Dabo have been personal,
some more bigger issues. I gotcha. And so if those things had not come up, your opinion of him would be a little bit different.
I don't think it doesn't change my opinion of him as a coach.
I'm talking about like I like that guy. Is what I'm saying.
I don't dislike him. I just don't agree with certain things that he said publicly.
Right.
And it's not that. It's like that's cool because everyone's entitled to feel the way they feel.
Sure.
But you don't say that publicly in this climate. Read the room. It's kind of more along.
That's something that you and I agreed to disagree on a couple years ago.
Yeah.
But I understand. Again, I understand and respect where you're coming from, certainly. And you have to wonder when you look at their recruiting this year if is that a part of it, or is it his failure to embrace NIL? But they're starting to come back though. They were struggling for a while, but they've been on a bit of a roll lately. So which is kind of silencing some people that thought that might have been a reason why they haven't recruited as well. Ed with a super sticker. Ed, thank you also very, 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 very much. So Sean, unless you can find some more of those, I think we've gotten to everything. I think we've gotten most of our stuff today. Ryan said, "My bad. I dropped 2 $4.99s instead of 1 $9.99. It's all good, man. I appreciate it. I appreciate it very, very much." So I think, Sean, we have everything, and let me see if I can find any more here now that I've been able to get out of there, and we'll see if we got any other. I think that's it, Sean. I think we got everything. So we had a ton of great questions, a lot of great comments. If we did miss a super chat, I do sincerely apologize for that. But we really appreciate all y'all being with us. Very interesting show today, Sean. I want to thank Charles Jagusah and Cam Williams for being able on the show today. Sean, thank you for setting that up with those two guys. I really appreciate that as well.
On the show.
Yeah. We took such a sharp turn after them.
Yeah.
So I really appreciate that. We'll be back next week. Obviously, Sean, you and I will be together actually in 2 days, right? You and I are going to be together at 4 p.m. on we will have a show tomorrow on Sunday at 3 p.m. It'll be me and Vince. We're going to cover the pending decision of Rico Flores. And then Sean and I are going to be together on Monday at 4 p.m. We are not going to have an afternoon show. We're not going to have a IB Nation Sports Talk on Monday because we are trying. I want to be able to give my staff the 4th off to enjoy and relax on that day. But Sean and I are going to get together. Not that I don't want him to have the day off, but he wants to be on for Christian Gray.
We celebrate on the 3rd. So
right. And Sean's been all over Christian Gray's recruitment, has a good relationship with him. So we want to be able to talk about whatever his decision is going to be on Monday as well. So we'll be back for that. And then Tuesday, we're back to our normal schedule. So we're excited about that. So everybody, thank you so much for joining Sean and I today. We really always love doing these shows with you, Sean. And I love all the engagement and everything that we had today. Appreciate all of y'all very much, including fans of other teams that were willing to respectfully engage with us, even if we don't agree or whatever. We love the fact that you're going to come in here and be respectful and talk with us, and we always welcome that. And I hope that Notre Dame fans always continue to treat you with respect as well. Respect doesn't mean you have to agree. It just means you have to, it doesn't always mean you can't have passionate disagreement. It just means there has to be a level of respect in it. But if you don't bring that, adios, you got to go.
Right.
So we will, we enjoyed it. It was a lot of fun. So Sean, you know what they got to do, right? They got to hit that like button, hit that subscribe button.
Right.
Yeah. Notification bell. Yeah, baby. You got to hit that bell because otherwise you don't know when we're doing shows. Share the podcast. And, Sean, join the message board because we got a lot of conversation going on there. A lot of fun conversation. If there's something you want to talk further about, take it to the board, right? We'll continue having the conversation there. So appreciate it, everybody. Have a great rest of your weekend. For those of you that have dogs like me, I'm sorry about what's about to happen with them the next couple of days. We have already had to make special food for Rita because the fireworks scare her so much. And it's just like our neighborhood just launches them for 4 days in a row. So sorry for all of y'all with dogs like me that don't like the 4th. But for everybody else, have a great time. We appreciate y'all very much. Thank you for joining us on the Irish Breakdown Podcast.